Over the last 5 years or so since we've been making videos, God, it's been longer than that. It's been like 7 years. Over the last 7 years that we've been making videos, one of our more popular series has been the small towns or small rural towns. And of those, the worst rural towns and worst small towns have always been the most popular. I don't know what it is with you people, you just like the negative. So today, we're doing our super cut or our compilation of some of our best worst small town videos. That doesn't even make sense. Best worst small towns videos. You know what I mean. So this video is going to be about 2 hours long. While you're watching, keep in mind, some of these videos were recorded back in 2018, and oh, have we gotten better since then. So let's take a look. We're going to start off with my old home state, California.
Are you thinking about moving to rural California? Did you watch our best rural towns in the Golden State video? If you did, we're looking at the other side of the California dream today. That's right, we're looking at the worst rural towns in California. Some people may be shocked at this, but California has plenty of good and bad rural towns. Some of the states that we've done lately have had less than 10. We just couldn't get 10 really great towns or 10 really bad ones. California has enough to do probably 3 or 4 videos of 10. It's a big state, it only makes sense. More and more people are moving to small and rural towns to retire or work remotely. There's a lot of great places in California. Those towns aren't on this list. The towns you're about to see, I'm sure, have plenty of great people. They just have enough not so great stats that help get them on a worst list. You should probably think twice or do a lot of research before you move there. Get it? Got it? Good. Let's take a look. Number 10, Huron, California. Huron sits about an hour south of Fresno in what is known as the Central Valley, which is a valley in the center of California, like the name suggests, where a lot of farming is done and rural towns exist. Most of the towns in the Central Valley wouldn't be considered great places to live, like Huron. This is the type of town you move to when you like really hot summers and are willing to roll the dice on water and air quality. Huron has a livability score of 42. If you remember, I said if it's in the 80s, it's great. If it's in the 90s, it's probably a gated community. When you get into the 70s, it's middle class, blue collar type thing. When you start getting below 65, it starts to suck. When you get into the 50s, it sucks. And here we are at 42. They have a population of 6,821 residents. The good news is the cost of living is 3% below the national average. Housing is 34% below the national average. That is outstanding for California. Now, where it really starts to suck is their crime rate. It's 9% below the national average, which is good. What's bad is their violent crime rate is 198% above the national average. About 39% of their residents live below the poverty line. That puts them about 158% above the national average. The median household income here is $25,321. That's 54% below the national average. Now, a lot of their crime might have to do with the harvest season. The population swells to over 15,000 due to the influx of the workers. Town of Huron was actually founded in 1888 as a water stop along the Southern Pacific Railroad's western route. Number 9, Avenel, California. Avenel is another Central Valley town, and it sits about the midway point between Los Angeles and San Francisco, around an hour inland from the coast. It is just south of Huron and a little over an hour south of Fresno. Back in the 1940s, this was an oil boom town. They had 3 different oil companies drilling there for a while, and that employed most of the residents. These days, it's pistachios and a prison that pays the bills. This town is home to Avenel State Prison, just south of town. Avenel has a livability score of 54. They got about 13,000 residents. I don't know if they count the prisoners. Their overall cost of living is 2% lower than the national average, which is outstanding. Housing is 31% lower. As we've learned, when a place isn't great to live, things are cheap. Their crime rate, again, is lower than the national average. That's outstanding. But their violent crime rate is 105% higher than the national average. About 32% of their residents live below the poverty line, which gets them about 117% higher than the national average. Their median household income here is $35,000, so they're doing better than Huron. If you want to buy a house here, you can get a pretty rundown place for under $150,000, but really if you want something decent, you're going to be looking around $300,000 and up. California. That's what it costs. And I looked it up, and yes, they do count prisoners as part of a local community. So almost 5,000 residents in Avenel are prisoners. Number 8, Hat Creek, California. Hat Creek takes us out of the Central Valley, sort of. It's just there above Redding, and Redding is kind of the northern boundary of what's considered the Central Valley, and this one's just a little northeast of Redding. And there's not many people living here. This is a small community on, as you guessed it, Hat Creek. This one's up in the hills a bit, so it's kind of a mountain town. And it doesn't look terrible. It's just got some bad stats. Everything in this town is graded an F. They have one D, which is cost of living. I mean, usually when you got really bad stats, cost of living usually shines. It's like an A+. No, they get a D for that too. Hat Creek is in the hills a little over an hour northeast of Redding in Northern California. They got a livability score of 45. Their population, it's kind of small. It's about 250 residents. That was in 2020. Their overall cost of living is 5% higher than the national average for a mountain town, kind of. That's pretty good, really. Mountain towns always are a little bit higher, even if they suck. Housing is about 17% higher, which is kind of good for California. And here's where it gets bad. Their total crime rate is 53% higher than the national average. Their violent crime rate is 59% higher than the national average. And about a quarter of their residents live below the poverty line. The town's economy relies on tourism, fishing, camping, and lodging. This is a great part of California to camp, and there is good fishing up this area. A lot of people will stop here or in this area for a day or two while they're, let's say, doing a big camping trip. Then they'll go up to Mount Shasta area. Number 7, Casmalia, California. Casmalia is about 20 minutes into the hills south of Santa Maria, California. If you ever take Amtrak's Coast Starlight north, this is the first town you pass by as you leave the coast to go inland. There's not much to it. The first time I passed by it, I'm all, whoa, was that a town? This little town is surrounded by hills and cows. Yeah, they got tons of cows floating around this place. It doesn't smell great, I'm sure. One of those towns you don't want to be eating dinner in when the wind shifts. Casmalia has a population of just 140 residents. Their livability score is 53. Now, their overall cost of living is 5% above the national average, which is California, and you're not terribly far from the coast, so that makes everything expensive. But the good news is their housing is 9% below the national average. If you look at the houses, you kind of know why. The crime rate here is 58% above the national average, and their violent crime rate is 64% above the national average. Their poverty level is even with the national average. That's good. Median household income here is $71,000. Someone's got to be making some serious money here, and it raises everyone else's average. Casmalia is a Native American term for it is the last. If you want to buy a house here, they don't have anything for sale, but last year they sold a couple homes for under $150,000 that were basically shacks. And then in April of 2022, they sold a pretty nice home for $380,000. Casmalia is a Superfund site, meaning it's toxic. By 1985, over 50 truckloads a day of toxic waste were being dumped in Casmalia. Respiratory disease and other ailments began to surface among nearby residents. The dump site was identified as the likely cause of the health issues. Number 6, Cabazon, California. Cabazon is out in the middle of the desert in Riverside County, California. If you grew up in Los Angeles and drove out to Palm Springs or Desert Hot Springs, something like that, you pass by this place, and you know you're passing by it because they got these giant dinosaurs off the side of the road. And the Indian Casino right across the road. At least they called them Indian casinos back then. Now it's called Morongo Casino Resort and Spa. When I was growing up, you'd drive by there in big letters, Indian Bingo. And this sign was huge. It like glowed and made the whole area look like daylight. Cabazon used to be a great place for retirees, not so much anymore. Sometime in the 90s, the stats for the area took a big turn. They have a livability score of 45. Now, the city only has a population of about 4,000, and it's losing, so by the time you watch this, it could be well below 4,000. The overall cost of living here is still 3% above the national average, because you got that sweet Indian casino across the way. I'm sure that raises the cost of living a little bit. The housing is 14% below the national average, so that's decent. And their crime rate is 14% above the national average. Their violent crime rate is 18% above the national average. 32.6% of the residents here live below the poverty line. You know, the stats aren't as bad as some of the other ones on this list. They're just out in the middle of the desert, and it sucks. If you want to buy a house here, don't. Matter of fact, have your medication checked if you're thinking about it. If you want to buy a home in Cabazon, it's gonna probably run at least $400,000 to get something that's livable. Anything below, let's say, $300,000, probably at some point manufactured street pharmaceuticals. If not, it looks like it probably did. So this one's a first for this channel. There's no footage of Ruth. Absolutely none. Ruth is like that uncle you have that refuses to get on the internet. I'm not getting on the internet. That's how the government gets you. That's how Ruth is. There's no footage, there's no pictures, just a satellite view. Weird. Oh, and if this is the first time you're seeing my face, I am not 20 and live in my parents' basement. Number 5, Ruth, California. Ruth, California is in Northern California on the south end of Ruth Lake. It's really on Mad Creek south of the lake. This place is out in the middle of nowhere and there's not much to it. Matter of fact, they only have 184 residents. This place is so far out in the sticks, there's no photos of it online. This is as far as the Google Street View car went. They got to about this point and said, nothing to see here, and turned back around. I'm not even kidding. Like I said, Ruth has a population of just under 200 residents, and their overall cost of living is 21% above the national average. Housing is 41% above the national average, but you probably never move here, so that really doesn't matter. Their total crime rate is 56% above the national average, and their violent crime rate is 62% above the national average. Almost half the population here lives below the poverty line. It's actually 42.4% of their population, and the average household income here is almost $13,000. It is roughly 5 hours south of the Oregon border. Make sure you stay till the end because you get to see a wealthy town that actually made a worst of list. Number 4, Desert Center, California. Desert Center is the type of place you move to when your life ambitions are to watch TV and eat stuff you bought at Walmart. That's about all you could do here besides get a nice sunburn and clean dust out of your eyebrows. Desert Center sits between Palm Springs and Blythe on the 10 freeway in the middle of the frickin' desert of California. They don't even have a truck stop at this place. There's no place to pull over here and get gas, something to drink, nothing like that. They got historic Desert Center Cafe, and judging by the boarded up windows and post-apocalyptic cafe sign, I'd say they're closed. Desert Center has a livability of 59, which is not bad for this list. They have about 189 residents, and their overall cost of living is 1% lower than the national average. Bravo, Desert Center. Housing is 41% lower than the national average. If you want to move there, looking on Zillow, the little community that's just outside of where Desert Center is, where most people live, they got a little man-made lake there, and they're selling homes. They go for $160,000 for a mobile home, or a legit home, which doesn't look the greatest. It's going for almost $600,000. They had a price cut last April for $140,000. Now it does come with 10 acres, but at one point they were asking for $700,000 for this place. Their total crime rate is 72% above the national average, and their violent crime rate is 79% above the national average. 33.9% of their residents live below the poverty line. A solar project was approved for this area. It was 2,600 acres of solar panels. It's in the middle of the desert. Great place for them. But a lot of the locals disagreed with the move. It's like, what are you worried about? You're worried it's going to bring in a bad element or something? It's solar panels in the middle of the frickin' desert. Number 3, Grizzly Flats, California. Grizzly Flats. Now there's a name. Sure, California has a grizzly bear on its flag, but it hasn't had a grizzly bear living in the state in decades unless it's in a zoo or some kind of rescue thing. Just last year, Grizzly Flats was basically leveled by the Cauldron Fire, and that's a bummer about living in this part of California. Wildfires are a serious problem. Grizzly Flats sits about an hour and a half east of Sacramento, kind of in between Lake Tahoe and Sacramento, and it's a beautiful area. It's too bad it's got some really bad stats and the possibility of another wildfire whipping through here. Grizzly Flats has a livability of 44. They have a population of just under 900 residents, and their overall cost of living is 5% above the national average. Housing is 10% below the national average, and I think the risk of a wildfire has a lot to do with why it's below. Their total crime rate is 69% above the national average. Their violent crime rate is 75% above the national average. Compared to some of the other ones on this list, they're not doing that bad in the poverty level. Only 18.7% of the population lives below the poverty line. Median household income here is $44,390. This one has a ton of homes for sale. The homes range from a lot that might have been burnt out or not last year from $60,000 for about an acre to homes that are going for $300,000 all the way up to some that are $900,000. And they're beautiful. It's a beautiful area. They just have some bad stats. Number 2, Dobbins, California. Dobbins, California is in Yuba County, California, about an hour and 20 minutes north of Sacramento, not too far from Lake Tahoe and the Tahoe National Forest. If you're living here and want to go in town, you're going to head to Yuba City, which is a lot closer than Sacramento. On Lake Francis, it's a beautiful area. The land is beautiful around here. Again, they just got some bad stats. Their livability score is 56 and a population of 710. Overall cost of living is 18% above the national average. Housing is 31% above the national average. And their crime rate is 39% above the national average. So yeah, they've got a lot of 30s here because their violent crime rate is 39% higher than the national average. And their property crime's 38% above the national average. But when you look at their poverty rate, they finally get out of the 30s. Their 24.8% of their population lives below the poverty line. If you want to move here, it can get expensive. They have some smaller homes and some lots that go for anywhere from $20,000 for a half an acre to $175,000 for 15. But they also have a really beautiful home that I looked at before. I honestly gave this one a thought, and it's going for $1.1 million. That's when I quit thinking about it when I saw the price tag. But this is a beautiful part of California. It's just too bad it's got those stats. And again, like this whole area, there's a serious chance of running into a wildfire or a wildfire running into you. And number 1, Geyserville, California. I was a little surprised to see this one on this list. The stats are not flattering. I've been to Geyserville. It's been a couple decades, but I thought it was a great little place, and it still looks nice. Its stats just don't. It's about 2 hours west of Sacramento, above San Francisco, not too far from the coast, near Stewart's Point. Kind of a cool place. It has the Russian River flowing right by town, which is cool. Russian River is a nice river. A lot of people that have to work in the Bay Area will move north of there, and Sonoma, Roseland, places like that. Geyserville might be a little too far north, but I'm sure some people still do it. They've got wineries around here. It's not a bad place. Let's look at the stats. Their livability score is 48. Their population is about 975 residents. Their overall cost of living is 55% above the national average, and housing is 119% above the national average. Their total crime rate is 16% above the national average, and their violent crime rate is 20% above the national average. Now here, they're not doing bad in poverty. It's actually 11%. Not bad. And their median household income is about $56,000. That's 2% higher than the US average. But this is like a small restaurant, bed and breakfast, and winery type place. Just doesn't have great stats, and it's expensive. Now, this is why it's on the list, really, because it is so expensive to buy a home here, it kind of makes it get on a worst of list. The typical home here starts off about $1.2 million. Yeah, not even kidding. 1.2 million. And some of them are almost $5 million. I mean, they're beautiful homes and have property and stuff like that. Go on Zillow, check them out. It's amazing. This place is too expensive for the stats that they have.
All right, next up we have Alabama. Alabama's a pretty good state. They do have a good amount of really bad small towns, though. Let's take a look. Alabama. Alabama has a lot of neighbors. It's bordered by Tennessee to the north, Georgia to the east, Florida and the Gulf of Mexico to the south, and Mississippi to the west. And the good news is, when you're next to Mississippi, you always look a little better. Alabama is classified as humid subtropical when it comes to climate. If you don't know what that means, it means you're going to be sweaty and miserable most of the year because it's hot, humid, and has bugs. Sounds like a party people from cold climates will never RSVP to. Alabama wouldn't really rank in the top 10 positive list on states on any category unless you were considering college football and their fans. The Alabama Crimson Tide, as they're known, are always one of the better teams in college football, and their fans are absolutely nuts about them. And that's a positive thing. And that's where the positivity kind of ends with Alabama. From an outsider point of view, Alabama doesn't have a ton of well-known history prior to the Civil War and, let's say, the Civil Rights Movement. They do have history, don't get me wrong, but nothing major like the burning of Atlanta during the Civil War. A lot of the history that Alabama has is localized to individual towns, not so much, say, the whole state. But to the average person, there's not a lot that jumps out. Alabama has some of the most beautiful towns in the country. None of them are on this list. This list is about the worst towns in the Yellowhammer State. Yes, that is another one of their nicknames. The Yellowhammer State has to do with a bird. So why don't you sit back, get some sweet tea, and watch my top 10 worst towns in Alabama. Number 10. Perdido Beach, Alabama. Perdido Beach is located on the northern shore of Perdido Bay, and apparently it's a tongue twister. It's taken me 8 takes to get this far. Perdido Beach is not to be confused with Perdido Key in Florida. They are close, but they're far from the same. Now, I've been to Perdido Beach. I had a hard time saying it then too, especially when I was drinking. I've stayed at the Perdido Beach Resort, and it was for a wedding. The resort was great. The town is the exact opposite of great. Being a beach town, the cost of living here is high compared to Alabama standards. But what's weird, the housing is really low for a beach town. Housing in most beach communities is insanely high with nice houses. This place is going the other direction. Most of the houses are dirt cheap and look like the house that the Beverly Hillbillies lived in the first episode when Jed discovered oil. The poverty here is 12% higher than the national average. I know that's not the worst, but it's a beach town. It's supposed to be filled with people that are doing better than broke. You know? Stop typing. Number 9. Arley, Alabama. Not far from some place you've never heard of is Arley, Alabama. This is not the type of place you go to if you're looking for a job. You won't get one here because they don't have any. If you do get a job while living in Arley, it'll probably be out of town, so you should probably just move there instead. There should be nothing keeping you in Arley. The unemployment rate is 4%, with a good percentage of those jobs being the I should probably hunt squirrel and drink from the creek instead of working type jobs. The poverty rate is 30%, and the income per capita is only $17,000 a year. That's it. When you add all those stats together, you come up with one big sign that should be put on Main Street that says, "Don't live here." Arley was incorporated in 1965. Number 8. Petri, Alabama. Petri is a super small town of only about 60 residents. In the 1940s, it was an Alabama boom town with 240 residents. Just kidding, 240 is not that many, but that was their peak. Those are the glory days of Petri, Alabama. Petri is about a 30-minute drive from a place called Needmore, Alabama. And I'm sure along that 30-minute drive, you'll at least say one time to yourself, nobody needs more Alabama. The town has a wholesale store and a poultry equipment store. Anything else you would need to drive all the way to Montgomery, about an hour away to pick it up there. But if you own poultry equipment, do you really need anything else? My dad always said never feel sorry for a man that owns his own poultry equipment. The overall crime rate in Petri is 58% higher than the national average. With 60 residents, and they rarely get visitors, that means one dude in this town is like an a-hole, and they can't put a finger on who it is. Number 7. Pine Hill, Alabama. Pine Hill is a town where educating the youth is less of a priority and more like a thing the state makes you do, it seems. The average student test score is 65% lower than the national average, while the graduation rate, oddly enough, is high at 89%. Normally, when you have low test scores, you have a serious dropout rate. Gotta give them a big thumbs up for that. Sounds like they have talented teachers, but not the resources. That's usually what that equates to. Pine Hill has one school, which holds about 275 students. The poverty level in Pine Hill is 226% higher than the national average, and the overall crime rate in Pine Hill is 97% higher than the national average. Pine Hill was incorporated in 1895. It's been around a while. Number 6. Baker Hill, Alabama. If you drive Highway 131 and blink, sneeze, and question your role in the universe, you might miss Baker Hill. The town only has 200 residents and not much else. They have a used car dealership that looks like it's being run out of someone's home, a church, a volunteer fire department, a gas station, and a thrift store. Thankfully, they have a Walmart about a 20-minute ride in case you need anything real besides a used car, or religion, or gas, or your house on fire, I guess. Anyway, the overall crime rate in Baker Hill is 81% higher than the national average. The income per capita in Baker Hill is 38% lower than the national average. Now, it existed as an unincorporated village since 1860, but was officially incorporated in 1997. Number 5. Urae, Alabama. Urae is only 40 miles from the Alabama-Georgia border with a little over 200 residents and a very high crime rate for such a small town. The overall crime rate is 86% higher than the national average. The total year-over-year crime rate has recently been climbing up by 7% a year. While in the town, you have a 1 in 18 chance of being involved in a crime. Now, this place doesn't have a really good history. In the late 1990s, 5 local white teenagers were found to have committed arson of a black church and vandalizing the nearby community of Little River after attending a Ku Klux Klan rally. They were later convicted and sentenced to several years in prison. These incidents and events were written about by author Paul Hempel in his book The Ballad of Little River, A Tale of Race and Restless Youth in Rural South. It was like back in 2000 he wrote it. So you had a book written about your town, but you really don't like to talk about it or let people know about it. Is that how it goes? Number 4, Rockford, Alabama. Rockford is located about 40 miles north of Montgomery and has about 600 residents. While the town does seem nice and have all the basic things you need for everyday life, the crime rate is less than satisfactory. The overall crime rate is 85% higher than the national average, and this place only safer than 6% of the other U.S. cities. While in the town, you have a 1 in 20 chance of being involved in a crime. Now, all that's not as bad as some of the other ones on this list, but it has other problems. Rockford, prior to 1935, was known as Hatchet Creek, and they've changed it to Lexington and then later on to Rockford. With that kind of crime rate, it's a good thing it's not called Hatchet Creek anymore, because it would be just too easy to make jokes about it. Now, this is where it's really bad. The poverty level in Rockford is 129% higher than the national average, and the income per capita is 52% lower than the national average. So this place is poor, really poor. Now, speaking of being poor, there's this really entertaining book about growing up poor in the Rockford area called Gin-Soaked Memories by Perry Green. I got it on my Kindle and I read it while I was on the train to Utah last month. It was really a fun read. I'll leave a link below. You should check that one out. It's pretty good. But Rockford is just straight up poor. It's too bad too. At one point it was a really nice looking little town. Still kind of is. It's just everyone around there has no money. Number 3, Pennington, Alabama. Pennington is a very small town of only about 200 residents. Housing prices often describe the overall well-being of a town, and this town is in bad shape, so the home prices are also no surprise. They're dirt cheap. The median home price here is $73,000. $73,000. 60% lower than the national average. Whenever I point this out, some yahoo always has to say in the comment section, there ain't nothing wrong with a cheap house. Yes, dude, there is. That is why it's a cheap house. There's a ton of things wrong with it, so stop typing. The only decently paved road in the town is the main street. Coincidentally, it's called Main Street. All the other more residential streets either not paved, so a lot of dirt sidewalks there, and have a ton of potholes. At least one house on every single block has boarded up windows. The poverty level in Pennington is 176% higher than national average. Their schools aren't good, they've got crime, and they got nothing else to do there, except board up windows and walk on dirt roads apparently. Number 2, Whitehall, Alabama. Whitehall is located just west of Montgomery and has about 800 residents. This is another one of those places that treats education as an afterthought. Test scores here are only 43% lower than the national average, while only 67% of the students graduate high school and only 6% of them actually go on to complete a 4-year college degree. Whitehall was established during the Great Depression in 1935 as a New Deal project under the Resettlement Administration. The town didn't become incorporated until 1979. It was just kind of there before. It was just an area. The good news about living in Whitehall, if your friends come and visit and try and figure out why you're living there, you could always take them to Burnt Corn, Alabama, about an hour and a half away and go, well, at least I don't live in a place called Burnt Corn. And number 1, Akron, Alabama. Akron is a very small town of just 330 residents. The town is located about 30 miles south of Tuscaloosa, Alabama. This town is the worst place to be if you need a job. There's a public library, a post office, and a gas station. Any other type of job, you have to find outside of town. And again, this is one of those places of why not just move to where the jobs are? There should be nothing keeping you in Akron. This place gets a big giant F in every single category they use to rank a location, but weather, which happens on its own, and cost of living. And as we all know, it's normally cheap to live where nobody else wants to live. That would be part of the first chapter of the award-winning book Common Sense for Dummies. Only 63% of the people in Akron have completed 8th grade. That's right, ladies and gentlemen, you heard me. 8th grade, not high school this time, 8th grade. The overall crime rate in Akron is 98% higher than the national average, while the poverty level in Akron is 189% higher than the national average. Anyone want to move to Akron with me? Akron is probably the worst small town in Alabama. If you think there's one worse, I'd love to hear about it, but Akron's pretty low. All right, back from 2018, we have what most people consider the worst state in the Union, Mississippi. And I remember making this video, and it was hard to cut it down to 10. There were so many bad towns and bad rural areas of Mississippi. Let's take a look. Mississippi is most often considered the worst state in the Union, right behind Arkansas, and for good reason. Mississippi has one of the worst education systems in the country, a failing economy, and out-of-control poverty. They also lead the nation in obesity. On the plus side of Magnolia State, you have the people and the cost of living. And there's something down-to-earth and honest about the people of Mississippi. My biological father is originally from just outside of Meridian, and I spent a few summers there in the backwoods of Chunky, Mississippi. That's right, called Chunky. There's a river there called the Chunky River, so obviously the the names have something to do with each other. Now, another great thing about this state, like I said, is the cost of living. It is dirt cheap to live in the state of Mississippi. The average resident keeps about 50% of their income. That's after taxes and living expenses. You still have half your money you earned, which most other states, it's somewhere in the 40 area. It's not good. But Mississippi has that part together, and that's a big plus. So Mississippi isn't all that bad. Today's video is about one bad aspect of life in the Magnolia State, the worst towns. They have a lot of them, so I'm gonna pick out 10, and we're gonna go with it. Let's take a look at my top 10 worst towns in Mississippi. Number 10, Flora, Mississippi. Flora is a town named after an early resident, Flora Man Jones, and is located just northwest of Jackson. The town is doing horribly when it comes to education. Now, the student-to-teacher ratio is really low, giving the students more one-on-one time, but for some reason, the average test score is 65% lower than the national average. This usually kind of tells you it's resources. The teachers aren't getting what they need. Just my opinion, with a little bit of background to it. Anyway, the poverty level in Flora is 161% higher than the national average. There's a lot of broke people here. Now, remember when I said the people of Mississippi are good people? This is a perfect example. It's a very poor community with very low crime. You never see that, but this town is still in bad shape. The average rent in Mississippi is the lowest in the nation, and the town of Flora is 38% lower than that. And stop typing. There's nothing wrong with cheap rent unless it's crazy cheap, then you gotta start wondering, why is it so cheap? Flora is a perfect example. Number 9, Dly Mississippi. Dly is located along the Wolf River near where the river lets into the St. Louis Bay. Nothing to do with St. Louis, Missouri. Being so close to the water, the cost of living is relatively high for the area, which is to be expected for being a coastal town. The goods and services index is nearly 10% higher than the state's average, and the housing index is 92% higher than the state average. The overall cost of living here is about 32% higher than the rest of the state. Now, this is where it gets weird. The unemployment in Dly is 84% higher than the national average, and the poverty level in Dly is 100% higher than the national average. Yet the overall crime rate in Dly is 85% lower than the national average. See? Good people. Like I said before, they're dirt poor, they don't have jobs, but they ain't ripping each other off. But the downside, like the rest of Mississippi, they have a school system that should be scrapped and just start from scratch. Only 70% of the people in Dly have completed high school. Those aren't good numbers. Number 8, Durant, Mississippi. Durant was founded in 1858 as a station on the Mississippi Central Railroad. Today, the population is less than 2,500 that have little to no work. The income per capita here is $12,000, with the poverty level at 201% higher than the national average. That's not good. And guess what? The schools here suck as well. Only about 72% of the people in Durant have completed high school. Durant is another one that doesn't have a lot of crime. But last October, Durant police say 2 men got into a fight at a beauty store. One man pulled a knife and stabbed the other one, and he went into critical condition. That's how many times he got stabbed. Multiple times. What went wrong in your life that gets you to the point where you feel pulling a knife on a dude while shopping for cucumber face wash is a good idea? Number 7, Walnut, Mississippi. The town of Walnut is a very small town of only 750 residents. This town has apparently come to the conclusion that all that reading stuff is overrated. The average school test score here is 57% lower than the national average, and the graduation rate is about 67%. Walnut was established in 1872 on land belonging to Henry Hopkins, an early settler and town founder, basically. The town was initially called Hopkins, but was changed to Walnut in 1876, so much for honoring the founder. You swap the name out 4 years later. I wonder if he was still alive and in town when they changed the name. That would be awkward. You're the toast of the town one day, the next day you walk into the local bar and ask, hey, anyone know anything about that sign on Main Street that says Walnut? Nobody says a word or makes eye contact with you. They just stare at their drink. Awkward! Number 6, Mayorville, Mississippi. This little town of about 550 people is on the banks of the Mississippi River in the Mississippi Delta. Mayorville is not a place for employment. It's actually said to be one of the worst places in the state for jobs. And unless they've had some drastic changes since, let's say, Tuesday, it still is a really bad place to get a job. The income per capita is only $6,000 a year. That's 79% lower than the national average. And that leaves the town's poverty at about 207% higher than the national average. And again, bad everything but crime. They got an A+ rating for crime. The hell, Mississippi. Number 5. Derma, Mississippi. Finally, a town with some crime in the Magnolia State. Derma has been the center of so many crimes, it's mind-blowing. This is a town with only about 900 residents, but the year-over-year crime rate has spiked 187%. In the past year, there's been a bunch of crimes, including countless burglaries of fast food establishments, post office was robbed, a church was robbed, and a gas station was robbed, and most recently, a man from Derma was charged with a 2016 murder. Those DNA services are just giving people up left and right. The poverty level in Derma is 169% higher than the national average. I'm so happy to find a bad town with bad poverty and bad crime in Mississippi. It's the way it should be. The universe feels balanced again. Number 4. Butte, Mississippi. Butte is located right outside the northern area of the Homachito National Forest, and God, I hope I pronounced that right. The overall crime rate is 47% higher than the national average. While it has been decreasing by 2% last year, crime is still so bad that the Community Network panel had a meeting last month discussing how the police will approach the organized crime in the area. Organized crime in a town of 1,000 people. Are you kidding me? This is a town that on their Wikipedia page lists their economy as a diner. Nothing else but a diner. And they have organized crime. This town shouldn't even have internet. The poverty rate in Butte is 186% higher than the national average. Number 3. Byhalia, Mississippi. Byhalia is a small town of just 1,200 residents. As of 2018, the violent crime rate in the town was 71% higher than the Mississippi average. Efforts are being made to better the town in this category, and it's expected that the crime rate in 2019 will be lower than 2018. However, in late 2018, this didn't help their stats, but there was a hit and run and a high-speed chase in a small town that really kind of screws your rate. Only 69% of the people in Byhalia have completed high school, and the average school test score in Byhalia is 63% lower than the national average. And to round things off, the poverty level in this town is 145% higher than the national average. Don't move here. Number 2. CROSBY, Mississippi. CROSBY, Mississippi is located within the Homachito National Forest. Again, that's National Forest, I can't pronounce it. I hope that's right. I've looked it up like 3 times. It sounds right. Other people have said it 5 different ways, but we're going with Homachito. The population of CROSBY is 285 residents. This is not an ideal place when you need a job. I mean, you always need one unless you decide to live off the grid and eat tree bark and drink pond water. Or you're 37 and still live with your parents so you can work on your art. And that's just a made-up story that has nothing to do with any of my cousins. Since it is a made-up story, we should give that character a name. Let's call him Dykel Riggs. And that has nothing to do with my cousin Michael. The unemployment rate in CROSBY is 115% higher than the national average. The poverty level in CROSBY is 195% higher than the national average. Don't move to CROSBY, especially if your name's Dykel Riggs. And number 1. Tutwiler, Mississippi. Tutwiler is a small town of only about 1,000 residents, not including the ever-growing population of the Tallahatchie County Correctional Facility. Problematic inmates from South Carolina and Vermont, Wyoming have recently transferred to this facility in the town. Why Vermont? Why Wyoming? I don't know. I get South Carolina. It's in the South and it's somewhat close. But Vermont, Wyoming? Is that what they do to convicts in Vermont and Wyoming to threaten them that they're going to transfer them to Mississippi? If you threaten to move me to Mississippi, I would quit whatever I was doing that was offending anyone. There's no way. I don't care if I was just going there to work at the local Dairy Queen. I would not be doing what I was being accused of to get me sent to Mississippi. 62% of the people in Tutwiler have completed high school. That's not a good number, folks. I don't know if you've been following along, but when only 62% of the people in town have graduated high school, that's not good. The overall crime rate is only 64% higher than the national average, so it's not terrible, but the crime rate has been increasing by 94% year over year. Stay out of Tutwiler. Tutwiler is the worst town in Mississippi for this list. All right, let's take a look at Middle America and the worst small towns in Iowa. This one, it was actually hard to find some that sucked. Let's take a look.
We've been doing a series of videos about great rural towns in the United States. The problem is, when a place is considered great, it's also expensive. And that's just how the world is. When something is good and most people want it, it's expensive. Like a Tesla Model Y. With all the safety features and autopilot costs about $80,000. Most people would want one. A 2002 Pontiac Aztek with a piano wire seatbelt and a couch cushion instead of an airbag goes for about $73. You gotta chase the possum out of the back yourself. Today we're looking looking at affordable rural towns in Iowa and why they're so cheap. A couple things you should know. First of all, it's really hard to find a really bad town in Iowa. Most of this state is really nice and the people are wonderful. It's just, sometimes they're cheap and they're cheap for a reason. As an added bonus, I'll tell you about some government programs that'll help you buy some rural real estate. One of the programs can help you even if you have a really low income. Get it? Got it? Good. Let's take a look. Number 5, Casey, Iowa. Casey sits about 45 minutes west of Des Moines and about an hour east of Omaha, smack dab in the middle of what is known as nowhere. There is nothing to do here but mow your lawn, eat, and watch World According to Briggs videos. Not a lot of people live here. There's only 391 residents, and they have a thumbs down when it comes to their crime rate. It's actually 23% above the national average. Their violent crime rate isn't horrible. It's 13% above the national average, which, like I've said before, places like Detroit in Chicago, you got neighborhoods where it's 500% above the national average. Their property crime kind of sucks though. It's 25% above the national average. And that normally is a thing when you have high poverty levels, which Casey does. They get a big thumbs down for their poverty level. They actually have 16.6% of their population living below the poverty line. They're not making a lot of money here. The median household income, that means the whole house, on average makes $39,500 a year. That is 29% lower than the national average. Now the good things are, they have good real estate prices, a low cost of living, and they do get good internet. Their real estate gets a faded thumbs up because they don't have anything right now, but in recent months like April and March, they sold quite a few homes for under $150,000. These are nice, livable homes that go for $150,000. If you buy something for $250,000 in Casey, Iowa, it's really a gem. So if this is someplace you're thinking about, keep an eye on Zillow, Redfin, whatever, something will pop up. Real estate prices are on the rise through most of the country, but when it's this low and in middle America, it's not climbing that fast, especially in the rural towns. You get in the cities might be a different story, but rural real estate is not growing that fast in flyover states. Casey gets a thumbs up when it comes to their cost of living. It's actually 22% below the national average, which is pretty good. Like I said, they get a thumbs up for their internet. They have Casey Mutual Telephone Company, which offers 200 Mbps fiber for about 85% of the town. Then they have like Coon Valley Co-op, which also offers 200 Mbps for about 10% of the town. They have like 3 other companies that cover about 5% of the town. I like any town that has news like this. This is like their big news. A Casey native veteran will be the keynote speaker of the 15th annual Vietnam Veterans Observance. His name is Colonel Jim McClung. I think it's McClung. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. If not, I'm sorry, I apologize. He's a retired Marine Corps vet who served 2 tours in Vietnam. He left Casey to go to Quantico, Virginia for training as a Marine. I watched an interview with him and he said that was quite a big deal back in the day because not a lot of people traveled outside of Casey. And he was going all the way to Virginia. Interesting fact, most of the streets here are named after Union Army generals from the American Civil War. They get a faded thumbs up for their health care because they don't have anything in town. Not that I could find. You're going to have a little bit of a trip to one of the local communities that might have a clinic or a hospital, and it could be anywhere from 20 to 30 minutes away. Number 4, Chester, Iowa. Chester, Iowa sits about 2 hours north of Cedar Rapids. It's right there on the Minnesota border. So you know it's going to be cold in the winter here. And that's with most of the places in Iowa. Not a lot of people realize how cold it gets during the winter. So that's a problem. If you got a problem with cold in the winter, stay out of Iowa. I got a video coming up on Arizona. That's where you should go. If you do decide to move to Chester, I'm sure they'd be happy to have you. Other than this last census, 2020, they had been losing population since the 1930s. In the 1930 census, they maxed out with 238 residents. In 2010, they had 127, and in 2020, they went all the way up to 139. So I'm sure they'd be happy to see you. They don't get many fresh faces, other than the occasional truck driver that drops off a load and maybe someone fell off their canoe and washed ashore in Chester off the upper Iowa River. Chester gets a thumbs down for their crime rate. It's actually 31% below the national average. Their property crime rate is 33% below the national average. When you only got 139 people living in the town, that's not hard to do, but it is what it is. They get a thumbs down for their poverty rate. Also, it's actually 32% of their population lives in poverty. The median household income in Chester is $29,375 a year. That's 47% lower than the national average. When it comes to healthcare, they're getting a thumbs down for that too. They have nothing in town other than a fire department that looks like it's being housed in a big aluminum shed. If you need an emergency room, you're going to have to do a little traveling. It's about 30 minutes away. in a town called Cresco, I believe you pronounce it. They got an emergency room, hospital, the whole bit. But anything major, you're probably going to have to head up to Rochester, Minnesota, which is to the north, 45 minutes to an hour away. They get a thumbs down when it comes to real estate for one reason only. Hardly anything's for sale. If it is for sale, it's probably a lot and you'd have to build your own house on it. But that lot may run you $15,000. The last house they did sell was in February of 2021 and it went for $20,000. That was 3 bedrooms and 1 bath and it didn't look horrible. Chester gets a thumbs down when it comes to internet. Now I've seen conflicting reports on 2 different websites. CenturyLink offers internet here. One said that it was to 55% of the town. The other one said it was 45% of the town. One also said it was only 10 Mbps, which sucks. And the other one said they can get up to 50 Mbps, which still kind of sucks. The good news is they got a really cool water tower. It's nice blue, says Chester on it. That's the highlight of this town. Number 3, Linden, Iowa. Linden, Iowa is not a great place to live, especially if you're looking for things like excitement, nightlife, dating options. Don't move to Linden for that. Linden doesn't have a lot going on. Matter of fact, the last time they had any excitement was in 2014 when a drunk driver led police on a chase and it ended in Linden. They didn't quit talking about that till 2019. They do have the Raccoon Valley Trailhead here, which is a nice bike path, hiking path. It's paved and it goes 89 miles. Which is kind of cool. It's not like it's going through mountains or along cliffs. It's just going through the fields of Iowa, but it's still kind of cool. They also have the Middle Raccoon Valley, not too far to the west of town. That's kind of cool. But that's about it. I don't think there's any legit businesses here like a restaurant, a diner, nothing. I mean, there's Corey's Tire and Auto Repair. You can go down there and pull up a lawn chair and cheer every time he changes a tire. That sounds exciting. Other than that, there's nothing here. In 1910, Linden maxed out its population with 315 residents. In 2020, they had 200. And right now, it's estimated they have 186. When it comes to their crime rate, it's not terrible, so they're getting a faded thumbs up. Their crime rate is 6% higher than the national average. Their property crime rate is 8% higher, so it's not the worst. When it comes to poverty, they're getting a faded thumbs down. It's not terrible, but it's not great. 11.5% of this town lives below the poverty line. They have an unemployment that's about 9% right now. The median household income is $37,375 a year. That's 32% lower than the national average. Now, the reason they get on this list, there is just nothing in this town. You got to go outside of town for everything, including hospitals, emergency rooms, doctor's office, anything. So their healthcare gets a thumbs down. If you need a real hospital, big one with any specialists, anything like that, you got about a 38-mile trip to Des Moines. To the west, they do have Guthrie County Hospital, which is smaller, but it's a hospital, 24 hours a day, emergency room, all that stuff. And that's about 15, 16 miles away to the west. When it comes to internet, they get a faded thumbs down. They only have Windstream in town, which I've seen 2 different reports. One said that they can get up to 50 Mbps. Another one said they can get up to 80 Mbps. And one said that they cover 98% of the town. The other one said they cover 89% of the town. So my advice is definitely call ahead if you do decide to buy a place here. Now let's talk about buying a place here. They get a thumbs down because there's nothing for sale here right now. And when they do have something for sale, it's really not the cheapest that you'd expect out here in the middle of Iowa. They sold a couple homes here in May of 2022, one for $246,000, one for $270,000. They got other newer homes that were sold for $370,000, $468,000, yeah, $220,000. This is the middle of Iowa. Your prices aren't supposed to be that high, but they get a big thumbs up for their cost of living because it's actually 25% lower than the national average. I mean, their cost of living is nice. Their housing prices are a little much. Number 2, Xyra, Iowa. Xyra seems like a nice place to be from. I'm sure most high school seniors start planning their escape sometime around their first homecoming dance when they realize there isn't even a hotel in town for the after party. Xyra sits about an hour west of Des Moines and weeks away from day drinking because there's nothing else to do. And it shows. Xyra's been losing population since 1950. They've had a couple years where they went up a little bit, but most years they've been losing population. In 1950, they maxed out with 1,100 residents. Right now they're sitting on a population of 790 187. And they get a thumbs down for their crime rate. Their total crime rate is 24% above the national average. Their property crime rate is 26% above the national average. When it comes to poverty, they get a faded thumbs down. It's a little strange here. 16.6% of the population here lives below the poverty line. Their unemployment rate, though, is 4%, which is 20% lower than the U.S. average currently here in May of 2022. And their median household income is $39,444 a year, which is 29% lower than the national average. So they have jobs, these jobs just aren't paying well. So those things aren't great. They also get a thumbs down when it comes to their internet. They don't have much to choose from. They have Connect by Windstream, which offers 200 Mbps, but it only offers it to 75% of the town. When it comes to healthcare, they get a faded thumbs up because they have the Xyra Medical Clinic in town. So that's decent. It's kind of small. I'm sure they do great things, but if you need to go to a hospital, you got Guthrie County Hospital, which is to the east, about a half hour away. Anything major, you got the Long Trip, which is over an hour into Des Moines. Xyra gets a big thumbs up when it comes to their cost of living, which is actually 25% lower than the national average. When it comes to their housing, they're almost neutral, but maybe a faded thumbs down because they got nothing to offer right now. But when they do, which in March and April of this year, they did sell some homes. Most homes here sell for under $150,000, and they sold a bunch last year for under $100,000. Now these are livable homes ready to move in. They're under $150,000 in most cases. If you buy anything that's above $250,000, you're living in a really nice place here. But they got nothing for sale, and if this is the type of place you're thinking about moving to, yeah, keep an eye on it on Zillow or Redfin, whatever you want to do. All right, before we get to number one, like I said, there's some information I wanted to give you, and there's a link down below for this. But the single family housing program is from the U.S. Department of Agriculture, and they're helping people move to rural towns. There's a big push for rural towns. That's why I've been doing a lot of videos on it. People that are remote workers, retirees, decided they don't want to be anywhere near a city. Fixed income retirements aren't getting you as far as they used to in Florida and Arizona and places like that. So a lot of people are looking at places like Iowa, Nebraska, whatever, to move to small rural towns. Your money goes a lot further there. But there's a couple different programs. The first one is the Single Family Housing Direct Loans, which helps you purchase or build with no money down in eligible rural areas. And this helps out low and very low income families. You also have the Single Family Housing Guarantee Loan Program. Again, purchase or build with no money down in rural areas that are approved for moderate household incomes. There is a link down below. Make sure you check it out. See if you fit the bill on this. You could be living in a rural town in a year or two. Just go through the programs. I don't think this is really a handout if you're getting something like this from the government because you're helping these communities stay alive. So the government's helping you and you're helping out some small community, bringing some new blood in there, whether you're a remote worker, whatever. All right, on to number one. And number one, Vulga, Iowa. Vulga sits about an hour north of Cedar Rapids, not too far west of the Mississippi River. Vulga, formerly known as Vulga City, was laid out as a town in 1852, and it was actually named after the river that flows through town called the Volga River, which that river is actually named after the Russian river, the Volga River. Even though they changed the name from Vulga City to just Volga, they got a lot of things in town that are still called Volga City, like Volga City Lumber, Volga City Opera House, and Volga City Hall. Wait, I don't know if Volga City Hall is actually Volga's City Hall. I don't know. Who knows? Moving on. Vulga has lost population in all but one census since 1940. There's not a lot of things keeping people here, and I'm sure they're going to continue to lose residents. And that's why I think they're probably eager to get some new blood in town. Maybe one of those programs we just talked about will help you move to Vulga. If you got any major medical issues, I wouldn't move to Vulga. They get a thumbs down when it comes to healthcare because there is nothing in town, at least nothing I could find. The nearest thing is about 9 miles to the northeast, and that's a small medical center. Anything major, you got about an hour drive into Cedar Rapids. Vulga also gets a thumbs down when it comes to their crime rate. It's 18% above the national average. Their property crime rate is 25% above the national average, which isn't good. They get a faded thumbs down when it comes to poverty. Almost 9% of their population lives below the poverty line. Their unemployment rate currently is 6%, and that's 39% higher than the U.S. average. Their median household income is only $36,042 a year. That's 35% lower than the national average. They're not making a bunch of money here if they even have a job. While I was researching this, I found out that a 61-year-old Vulga man decided to kidnap a teenage girl. That was just last year. If convicted, he's going for the long trip, which is life in prison. When it comes to internet, Vulga gets a thumbs down because they don't have much to offer you. They have a bunch of satellite things, which we've learned on this channel kind of suck, but they have Windstream that only offers 12 Mbps. That's their fiber or their DSL, and they only offer it to 64% of the town. That's not good. You might be able to get Starlink here, but I couldn't find any reports on how good it is in this area, so that's that. Now let's talk about the good things about Vulga. Vulga gets a big thumbs up for their cost of living, which is 25% lower than the national average. Outstanding, Vulga. When it comes to real estate, they get a faded thumbs up. They probably get a thumbs up, but they don't have anything for sale right now. When they did last year, they sold 4 different homes, all of them under $100,000, and all of them looked livable. Now I'm just going off of what Zillow's showing me, but it looked pretty good. A lot of their homes that go for sale are under $50,000, and they're decent. Maybe need a coat of paint, a little cleanup, they're decent homes to live in. Like all 5 of the towns on this list, they're not the greatest place to live. They got some crime, they got some other issues, but they are inexpensive, and it's Iowa. Even though they got some problems, it's still pretty good. Kind of like hot pizza versus cold pizza.
All right, heading back out to the desert in the western part of the United States, we have the Silver State, Nevada. Nevada's strange. They do have some really bad rundown towns. It's like where people go to when they want to escape society and just live with a small amount of people. Nevada's a good place for that. You won't get many visitors, too, if you find one of these little enclaves in Nevada. Let's take a look.
Nevada's another state that doesn't have a lot of towns, so there was very few to choose from. There's a lot that goes into it. It's a sparsely populated state. If you look at the population per square mile, they have the 8th lowest. Really, it should be a lot lower, but the Las Vegas metro area is so huge, it kind of raises them up. The other states ahead of them don't have huge cities like that. Part of the reason for that is 81.07% of the state is managed or controlled by the federal government. Military facilities, natural resources, recreation, grazing, things like that. They also have a lot of towns with like under 100 people. That's not enough to be included in a list like this because you're really not getting accurate stats with that low of a number. Okay, before we get going, there's one thing I need to say. Whenever you go to small towns in the United States, you'll find that 90% of the people are just wonderful people. But they all have that 10% giving them bad stats, and it sucks. And that's how it is with every state, no matter, well, New Jersey, it might be reversed, but in most states, that's exactly how it is. Got it? Get it? Good. Let's take a look. Number 5, Caln Nevada. Caln Nevada is near the California-Nevada-Arizona border, about 30 minutes west of Laughlin, Nevada, in the middle of the frickin' desert. And they get their name Cal for California, Nev for Nevada, and Air for Arizona because it's right near the border of all 3. You might need reading glasses to find this place on a map. This is a little desert glorified rest stop that is home to a casino, airstrip, and classic diner. And when I say casino, I'm being generous. This is a bar with some slot machines and poker machines. The post office here is bigger than the casino. We've talked about this one before. It's been for sale for quite some time. I saw one thing that it's been for sale for like 6 years or since 2016, stuff like that. But I saw an interview with Nancy Kidwell, who owned the town, and she said she's been trying to sell it for 20 years. Nancy and her husband, Slim, turned this little patch of land into a town back in the 1960s. Slim was about 30 years older than her and died in the 80s. And Nancy, being a grieving widow, did the only reasonable thing a grieving widow does in a very small town of 250 people. She married Slim's son. It's kind of weird, but not as weird as it sounds. This was Slim's son from another marriage. This isn't Arkansas, it's Nevada. Just recently, last year, 2021, late 2021, a company bought the entire town. They plan on putting a facility there. This is a company that mines sulfur. So Caln Nevada may be growing up. Caln Nevada has a livability score currently of 56, which is not good. If you've never seen these videos before, 90s and above usually means you live in like a gated community type place. In the 80s, they're really nice places to live. When you start getting in the mid 70s, they're blue collar, middle class. Anything below 70, it starts sucking. And when you're into the 50s, you really blow. They have a crime rate that's 44% above the national average. Their median household income here is $23,000 a year. This is a great place if you're surviving just on Social Security. And if you're living here, you probably have some money left over every month for gambling and drinking. Oddly enough, only 13% of the town's population is below the poverty line. When it comes to real estate in Caln Nevada, now, even though a place has bought this town up, they still have property for sale. Usually about $35,000 will get you a lot, and you got to have something built on it. But they do have one home for sale, 2-bedroom, 2-bath, $295,000. Actually, they have a second one, $350,000. Those seem like an awful lot for this area. Number 4, Searchlight Nevada. Just up the road from Caln Nevada and about 37 minutes northwest of Laughlin, Nevada, you find the town of Searchlight. This is the hometown of some very famous people. Harry Reid, who was a United States Senator from 1987 to 2017, and the Senate Majority Leader from 2007 to 2015. William Harold Nellis, aviator, whom Nellis Air Force Base is actually named after. He was a pilot in World War II. And Edith Head. She is a famous Hollywood costume designer that worked from like the 1930s to almost to her death in 1981. Some of the movies she worked on actually came out later on, 82, 83. Now, how does it get a name like Searchlight? It's not at the top of a mountain or anything like that, and I'm going to tell you. According to Senator Harry Reid, the most likely story of how the town got its name was when George Frederick Colton was looking for gold in the area on May 6, 1897. He supposedly said it would take a searchlight to find gold here. Shortly after, he found gold, leading a boom era in this area. At one point, they had a population larger than Las Vegas. So, a sarcastic statement is responsible for the name of a town. Searchlight Nevada has a livability score of 58. Doing great. They have a population of 363. This is not the boom town it used to be. They have a crime rate that's 26% above the national average, and 32% of their residents live below the poverty line. The median household income here is about $27,000 a year. That's 51% lower than the U.S. average. If you want to buy real estate in Searchlight, you got a few options, and most of the time it's just lots and acreage. But they do have one home for sale that's going for $249,000. They also have a trailer going for $90,000. But most of the time you're going to get a lot, and those range anywhere from $25,000 to $80,000. The further you get away from town. Make sure you stay towards the end, because I'm going to tell you about a town where people think there's an underground tunnel to an alien civilization in the Nevada desert. Number 3, Beatty, Nevada. Beatty is almost 2 hours north of Las Vegas, near the California border. This town is known as the gateway to Death Valley. I've never thought that was a very appealing title for anything. Death Valley doesn't really make me think of vacations or a good time. A lot of people vacation in Death Valley, and that's great now that it's a national park, and, you know, we all recognize that it's got some beauty, but could you imagine being like one of the pioneers coming out, and they're all, oh yeah, we're going to Death Valley. You're doing what? You're going where? Yeah, we're just going to cross Death Valley and get to the ocean. People go, Death Valley? Anyway, I've just always thought it's a strange name to be promoting. This town was established in 1905, and it was named after Montilius Murray Old Man Beatty, who settled a ranch in the Oasis Valley in 1896 and became Beatty's first postmaster. This is a very historic and interesting boom town. Back in the early 1900s, they discovered gold, and this place blew up quick. Train was there, people showed up, hotels were built, and then San Francisco had an earthquake in 1906 that started a panic. Banks from back east pulled out of the west. Mines didn't have banks to back them. Mines shut down, and people moved on. And Beatty became almost a complete ghost town. They even pulled up the train tracks. They thought, oh, well, the train's not going to be coming back here. Might as well use the steel. Beatty has a livability score of 64, and right now I've seen a couple different things. I've seen they got a population of 900, and I've seen they got a population of 770. The U.S. Census has them at 770, and that was in 2020. I doubt they've gained, 130 people. Anyway, their total crime rate is 31% above the national average. Their poverty level is honestly not that bad. Only about 2% of their population lives below the poverty line. That is pretty good. And their median household income here is $50,000. That's only 9% lower than the national average, which isn't terrible. It's just this place is out in the middle of nowhere, and they got some crime that's not great. If you want to buy a home in Beatty, it's all over the map. I mean, some places start off at $50,000. Most manufactured homes are right around $100,000, and that's a majority of what's going on in this town. They got 11 acres in town right now for sale, $400,000. And it looks like it's already plotted for people to buy individual lots. So you could plop down $400,000 and, I don't know, maybe make $1 million off it. Who knows? Number 2, Schurz, Nevada. Schurz, Nevada is on the north side of Walker Lake, which is a very interesting place. Alien conspiracy theorists that think the government's hiding aliens from us believe that there's an entrance to an underground complex inside Walker Lake. Yes, an alien tunnel. This underground complex goes all the way to Colorado, apparently. Like, we got this whole extra state underground. People don't come to Schurz for the, alien complex. They come here for the fireworks. Yeah, for some reason, this town has a couple firework places. Bad Jack's and TP Fireworks. And I watch more than a few videos on YouTube of people driving out here just to get fireworks. And that's the most exciting part about Schurz, Nevada. Schurz sits about 2 hours southeast of Reno, Nevada, and it is located on the Walker River Indian Reservation. This is another town or census-designated area that's a little confused on their population. One report I saw said they have about 650, another one said they have a little over 950. Someone there doesn't own a calculator or something. They have a livability score of 48. Their total crime rate is 62% above the U.S. average, and 40% of their residents live below the poverty line. Median household income here is $27,000. That's 50% lower than the U.S. average. The town was named after Secretary of the Interior Carl Schurz. He was in office from 1877 to 1881. Rutherford B. Hayes was his president. You never hear much about Rutherford B. Hayes. If you want to buy a house in Schurz, you can't. There's nothing for sale. There hasn't been anything for sale in quite some time. If you want to buy a house in this area, you'd probably have to go down to the town of Walker Lake, live there and then come up here to get your firework fix or something. Who knows? And number 1, West Wendover, Nevada. West Wendover is on the Utah-Nevada border, with Wendover being in Utah and West Wendover being in Nevada. Like any Nevada border town, they've got a casino right there for you in case you're jonesing to play some slots and you live in Utah. This town had a little bit of a boom. In 1990, they only had 2,000 residents. In 2000, they had 4,721, and it's been downhill since then. Right now, they have about 4,500 residents. Most of them working for the casino or are retired. If you do want to buy a house here, they have some relatively affordable lots for sale. $45,000 will get you a lot, and you gotta have the house built, but it's on a golf course. And then they have some nice homes, desert homes, but they go for about $350,000, $330,000. If you want to be near a casino, but you hate Vegas and Reno and all this might be an option. They got a KOA too, in case you want to go up there and try it out while you camp. West Wendover has 5 main casinos: Red Garter, Wendover Nugget, Rainbow, Peppermill, and Montego Bay. West Wendover has a livability score of 62. That's not the worst on this list, but it's not good. They have a crime rate that's 20% above the national average, and I thought this should stick out for you. Their violent crime rate is 124% above the national average. What's going on there? Just about 25% of their residents live below the poverty line, and the median household income is about $44,000 a year, which is about 17% lower than the national average. In late April, a woman was arrested for setting a car fire inside the Wendover Hotel parking garage. No one was hurt in the incident.
All right, let's go on to my current state, Oregon. Oregon, everyone knows Portland's a frickin' nightmare. We do have some small towns that pretty much suck too. They're on this list. Let's take a look.
Are you thinking about moving to rural Oregon? Did you watch our best rural towns in Oregon video? If you did, today the judgmental pendulum swings back the other direction. That's right, we're looking at the worst rural towns in Oregon. These days I try and keep a positive vibe on this channel, but this type of video has sort of been requested a lot lately. Whenever I post a best rural towns video, I get a flood of emails and comments that normally start with something like, "What about this town?" And then they go on to list some random rural town that in most cases looks like a miserable place to live. So I thought it was time that we start listing some towns you should probably avoid. Are these towns the absolute worst places on earth? No, they just have some bad stats, a bad location, things like that. These towns normally have high crime, high unemployment numbers, and more than enough poverty to go around. One thing I need to say, when you go to a small rural town, 90% of the people are some of the best folks you'll ever encounter. Small town people are like that. They just have that 10% screwing up a nice place to live. Got it? Get it? Good. Let's take a look. Number 5, Jordan Valley, Oregon. Jordan Valley is where you move when you're heading east to get as far away from Portland, Oregon as you can, but you can't quite make yourself move into Idaho. Jordan Valley is about an hour south of Nampa, Idaho, just about on the Idaho-Oregon state line. If you need a hospital, you better have some time on your hands. Nampa is the closest, like I said, about an hour away, or you got Burns, Oregon, 2 hours to the west if you have some strange insurance that says the entire state of Idaho is out of your network. This place is not a great place to live unless you really want to take pictures of a abandoned motel. They have a livability score of 64. Let me explain that. In my experience, if you're in the 80s, it's a really good place to live. If you're in the 90s, it is an outstanding place to live, and it's probably a gated community. When you start getting below 70, it starts to suck. And as you'll see on this video, some of them suck terribly bad. Jordan Valley isn't the worst place. It's got a livability of 64. They only have a population of about 150 people. The good news is their overall cost of living is about 15% below the national average, and their housing is about 49% below the national average. That's both buying a home and renting, if you can find something to rent there. Now here's what really sucks there. Their crime rate is 79% higher than the national average, and their poverty level is almost 9% above the national average. The unemployment here is about 100% above the national average. They don't have jobs, unless you've decided collecting recycle on the highway is a job. They have the Jordan Creek and the Baxter Creek in town. They kind of meet right there. So in case you want to fish for dinner, and then they got plenty of open space around Jordan Valley in case you want to hunt prairie dog for dinner. Number 4, Maupin, Oregon. Maupin sits about 2 hours east of Portland, Oregon, and it's about 2 hours from Bend, Oregon. So it's right there in the middle, tucked behind Mount Hood on the Deschutes River. Maupin's a great place to move if you like fishing, rafting, and you want people to forget you exist because no one will come visit you. Maupin is in what they call the rain shadow. Since it's tucked behind Mount Hood, all that rain that Portland's famous for never seems to make it out to Maupin, and this kind of gives it a landscape that's kind of brown, especially when you look at the west side of the state, the coastal part. This is definitely almost looks like a desert. Not desert, but it almost looks like it. They do have a clinic in town, but if you need a hospital, you're gonna need about an hour for travel time. Better not be an emergency. It's either that or you go down to the river and rub some mud on that rash you got. Oddly enough, they have a world-class track and field complex in town. It's really strange. This is a really nice place for such a small town. Maupin has a livability score of 55, which is not outstanding. They have a population of just about 650 residents. Being this far out in the sticks, you don't even get a discount on your cost of living. It's actually 2% higher than the national average, which isn't great. Their housing, though, is 20% lower than the national average. So if you want to move here, call Jessie Rose. She's a local realtor that's on YouTube. Now here's some of those bad stats I was telling you about. Maupin has a crime rate that's 68% above the national average. Now I will put a little asterisk on this one. I believe a lot of that has to do with the people that come to town to go fishing, rafting, whatever. Rafting usually means a lot of alcohol and a lot of problems. So I almost wouldn't put this one on the people of Maupin. But they do have a poverty level that's 11%. That's pretty high. Their unemployment rate is 5%. Most of the people here survive on that rafting and fishing industry, and that's seasonal. Number 3, Falls City, Oregon. Falls City sits about 35 minutes west of Salem, Oregon. It's sort of where the farmland meets the trees. I drove through here about 3 years ago. I'm totally kidding. Nobody drives through here unless you make a wrong turn while being chased by the police. The last time the Google Street View car drove through here was 2008. Even back then, you could see on the map how it went about halfway down Main Street and was like, yeah, no, I've seen enough. And they made a hard left and went south. And if you see the stats on this place, you'll see why. They have a livability score of 43. That is one of the absolute lowest I've ever seen. I honestly think the lowest I've ever seen was like 38 or 39. 43 is not good. They only have a population of about 950 residents. The good news is their overall cost of living is 14% below the national average, and housing is 29% below the national average. The downside is their crime rate's 84% higher than the national average, and their poverty level is 41% higher than the national average. Their unemployment rate is 48% higher than the national average. But if you like to fish, they do have a creek that runs right through town called the Little Luckamute River. It's not a creek, it's a river, they say, but they got a bunch of other creeks like Berry Creek in the area and Dutch Creek. So if you like to fish, like sit by the creek and stare at the water, good place to live if that's your thing. Number 2, Spray, Oregon. Yes, it's called Spray. Spray, Oregon is out in the middle of nowhere on the John Day River. I could tell you what it's by, but it would be easier to tell you what it's not by. Civilization, a nightlife, a Walmart, or anything remotely close to a hospital. If you're not feeling good, my suggestion would be to bake a birthday cake, put some candles on it. When you're blowing the candles out, wish that infection away. That being said, it does sit 3.5 hours southeast of Portland in the Oregon Outback. They have a livability score of 54. There's just about 200 people that live here. The overall cost of living is good. It's 15% below the national average. Housing, if anything ever goes up for sale, is 51% below the national average, but they have a crime rate that is 103% higher than the national average. And it's mostly property crime. People are stealing stuff from each other here, I guess. Their violent crime rate is only 22% higher than the national average, but their property crime is 120% higher than the national average. Their poverty level is about 30%, and the unemployment rate is about 98% above the national average. Like Falls City, this place is so far out in the sticks that the Google Street View car hasn't been there in over a decade. 2009 was the last time that thing rolled through town. That's one reason we're getting such bad footage on this video. It's hard to come up with footage for these really out-of-the-way small towns. Every year, the town of Spray holds their annual Spray Rodeo and Eastern Oregon's half marathon race. It takes place on Memorial Day weekend, and this is the oldest annual half marathon in the state. I thought that was interesting. And also, it's on the John Day River, which is a good-sized river, and if you like to fish or float down the river, this is probably a pretty good option. All right, before we get to number 1, don't forget we have another channel called On This Day. There's a link down below. We also have the vlogging channel, which is usually travel and videos of my pig. There's a link for that down below. That's just called Life According to Briggs. All right, on to number 1. And number 1. Prospect, Oregon. Prospect, Oregon sits a little over an hour east of Grants Pass, Oregon, not too far from Crater Lake on the Rogue River. Prospect's a town with some bad stats in a beautiful area. This is a great part of Oregon if you like the outdoors. I mean, they got trees, it snows, they got rivers, canals, creeks, everything around here. So it's great for the outdoor types. They have a cafe and a horrible livability score of 44. Almost 500 people call Prospect home, and they're not there because of a really low cost of living. It's actually 1% higher than the national average. Their housing, though, is 25% below the national average if you could ever find anything to buy there. I mean, you could buy a lot, build something there, maybe a log cabin, a Unabomber hut, whatever. Make sure you have a padlock on your Unabomber hut because the crime rate here is 73% higher than the national average. Their violent crime rate is next to nothing. It's only 2% higher than the national average, so that's not bad. But their property crime rate is 87% above the national average. 29% of the residents here live below the poverty line, and they have an unemployment rate that's about 5% higher than the national average. So that sounds to me like they got some jobs, but they don't have many good paying jobs. That's kind of typical for a rural town, though. This is one of those towns that's always at risk of being burnt out by a wildfire. Prospect has been here since 1870 and started out as a logging camp. I know this one has some bad stats, but this is a great area to live in if you do like the outdoors of Oregon.
All right, heading back across the country, we go to the retirement paradise, Florida, the Sunshine State. Let's take a look. If you're thinking about moving to a small town in Florida, this list is about towns you should probably avoid. So sit back and watch my top 10 worst small towns in Florida. Number 10, Duck Key. Now, normally you wouldn't find the Keys on here, but this one's kind of unique. Duck Key is one of the southernmost cities in the state of Florida. Now, living on the Keys is very popular, and it's an easy way to brag about your wealth. Duck Key is slightly different, however. At the surface, it will look like any other Key city. When you look a little deeper, you realize that most of these residents can hardly afford to live here. Although the median household income is about $71,000, these home prices can be upwards of $2 million. A mobile home here that needs some work will not be any less than $300,000. You can get an 800 square foot lot for $200,000 here. That's a lot of money for 800 square feet. You wouldn't be able to get a single family home in any condition for any less than $500,000. This place isn't crowded and doesn't have many amenities like other keys do. They have a bunch of vacant lots. This is like the trailer park of Keys. It is the kind of place that you brag to people that you live in the Keys, then you try and avoid telling them which key. If you want to visit, you can get a room at the Waterfront Fun and Funky Duck Key Condo. That's a real place. Take a look. I don't know who named it that. It's ridiculous. Number 9, Everglades City. Everglades City is probably the closest habitable land to the Everglades. The Everglades is a national park that's really just a huge swamp. This is the type of place you move to if you really enjoy sweating and boredom. Sure, you have things like airboats and swamps to play in, but anyone that's ever lived in or around an alligator-infested swamp will tell you those get old quick. The city smells horrible all the time. The humidity here is suffocating. Then on top of it, you have to fear for your safety all the time because of alligators. If you move here, you're in luck. The city has a population of 400 other poor decision makers. Number 8, Glen St. Mary. Schools in Glen St. Mary are not the type of schools you'd want your kids to attend. It may be a good idea to enroll them in a private school or at least drive a short distance to McClenny for a better education. Actually, if you sent them to school in Savannah, Georgia, the 2.5-hour drive both directions every day would be totally worth it. The graduation rate here is only 72%, while the graduation rate in McClenny is 84%, and they also have test scores that are 10% higher than the national average. The overall crime rate in Glen St. Mary is 59% higher than the national average, and their unemployment is a staggering 87% higher than the national average. Number 7, Callahan. Callahan is a rather controversial area to live in. During the 1950s, when the KKK movement was really big, there were a total of 45 claverns in the state. In case you don't know what a clavern is, it's what they call a local unit of the KKK. With such a low population of about 1,300 people, the town still had its own clavern, which, you know, only 1,300 people and they got that going on there in such a small town. Anyway, now, some people say they aren't there anymore and they're not active and it's all their history, but with history like that, with racism deeply rooted in the city, leaving many residents here still in that state of mind, a lot of people say. The poverty level in Callahan is 65% higher than the national average. Number 6, Berrydale. There is nothing to do in Berrydale. Berrydale is a place you move to if you hate people and yourself. And maybe you're into punishing yourself for some reason. And when I say punishing yourself, I'm not talking about that fun kind, so stop typing. We don't want to hear about your kink. This small town only has a population of about 450 residents as of the 2010 census. The only thing you'll find in this town is an animal feed store, a trucking school, a few churches, and a Dollar General. Anything more, you're going to have to take a trip down to Pensacola about an hour away. There is nothing worse than being a hot girl in a small town. The only place anyone ever takes you out on a date is either to the Dollar General or the Woods. High school graduation rate here is 65%. Number 5, Madison. Madison is home to 5 public schools, an alternative school, and 2 charter schools. These schools educate a total of 2,675 students who are potentially at risk of getting dumber by going to school. They're not receiving the best education they could get through the public school system here. If you look at all their school stats on Area Vibes, you might cry. Recently, the school district has had to make some serious budget cuts, resulting in dozens of layoffs, which ultimately affect the students, as you can imagine. Because of all the pressure being made, it forced the superintendent, Dr. Pickles, to resign this month. And yes, that is her name, Dr. Pickles. It's not a character from VeggieTales. Number 4, White Springs. White Springs is located in northern Florida, only about 25 miles from the Florida-Georgia border. This town is a tourist destination thanks to the Folk Festival every summer. Living here, however, is not exactly affordable, especially for its current residents. The median household income is about $28,000 a year, which is 40% lower than the national average, and about 30% of their residents live in poverty, and nearly 13% are unemployed. Thanks to the ever-growing housing prices, it's very hard to be able to afford to live here, especially if you're not making any money and housing prices are going up. It's kind of nuts. At least you get to hear folk music once a year while standing in line at the food bank. That's good news. Number 3, Cross City. Cross City is a small town with big criminal stats. It's like they're trying to win something. Although the crime rate is 15% lower than the national average, the crime rate here is pretty high for a town its size. Just within the last 6 months, there have been a handful of domestic battery crimes, along with a motel shooting where at least 2 residents were killed. Thankfully, those criminals don't have to travel far since the county jail is within the city limits. See? Location, location, location. It works for crime and real estate. Number 2, Lemon Grove. Lemon Grove is definitely a place where you need to find a job within the town or nearby before actually moving here if you want to be able to live somewhat comfortably. It seems like there's very few employment opportunities within the town. That is, unless, of course, you're a skilled aluminum can recycler and own a really bitchin' mountain bike with one of those cool tow-behind trailers things. Yeah, then you can make some money. See those guys all over the place. The income per capita is only about $22,000 a year, which is 19% lower than the state average. However, roughly about 66% of the population in this town are living in poverty. Lemon Grove is not a place you want to live. All right, before we get to number 1, don't forget the poll at the end of the video. That helps out with data for the next videos, or upcoming videos, I should say. Always helps when you participate. And number 1, Indiantown. Besides sounding like a racial slur, Indiantown is not a place to be when trying to live a safe, crime-free life. The crime is very prevalent within the city. The overall crime rate is 31% higher than the national average. Just last month, in March, there were 5 felony arrests among the residents. These charges included burglary, grand theft, drug charges, and aggravated battery. They have a little less than 3,000 people. The poverty level in Indiantown is 102% higher than the national average. Now, all 3 of the schools in Indiantown, they got some more in the county, but in Indiantown, they have 3. All 3 of them scored big fat Fs. Those schools would be Indiantown Middle School, Warfield Elementary, and Teen Parent Indiantown. You heard me right. It's called Teen Parent. They have a school called Teen Parent. Who decided this was a good name for a school? Imagine putting that on your resume. That just screams to a potential employer that you're not a good thinker. And Teen Parent has grades 6th through 12th. Does that bother anyone else that there's a group of 6th graders going to a school called Teen Parent? Indiantown is probably the worst town in Florida. All right, now we get to our only New England state on this list. It's Connecticut. Most New England states and most people from New England would like to hand over Connecticut to someone else, like the Northeast, be there with New Jersey and New York. I mean, it's right there. Why not? Then they're out of New England, not stinking them up. Now, what's funny about Connecticut is they have some of the wealthiest neighborhoods and towns in the country. They also got some pretty rundown ones. It's like I just always get the feeling, it's not totally correct, but it's almost like they have no middle ground. There's no middle class in Connecticut. There's the super wealthy and the people that are barely scraping by. Let's take a look. What is going on, everyone? How are you doing? I hope better than this guy. I don't know what it is, but I love to see people and things crash. But I don't like to see people hurt. It's sort of weird. It's like I love a good train wreck as long as nobody's on the train. Speaking of train wrecks, let's talk about Connecticut. Last time I did a video about Connecticut, I had a radio station give me a call. They weren't too happy. Connecticut has been around for a while. It was first established in 1636, making it one of the original 13 colonies and one of the first places in the New World to tell England to go F itself because we were doing our own thing now. Connecticut is the 3rd smallest state by area and the 29th most populous state with about 3.5 million people. It is also the most southern New England state that carries a couple nicknames. My favorite is the Nutmeg State because nutmeg reminds me of Christmas and a really dirty joke. That may seem like a strange combination of Christmas and dirty jokes, but it wouldn't be if you knew my Uncle Jack and spent a little time with him during Christmas. Connecticut has a strange demographic situation. It has a few of the richest towns in the country and a ton of dirt poor ones. Now, a lot of states have that kind of thing, but they're the extreme. Give you an example. The average income among Connecticut highest earning households was nearly 43 times the bottom 99%. So that 1% is 43 times what everyone else is making. That's dwarfing the national ratio of 25-1. Like I said, a few of the best areas and a ton of the worst areas. And since one of the most popular searches on Google and YouTube is the word worst, that's what we're going to take a look at. That's what the people want. That's what the people get. So sit back and watch my top 10 worst towns in Connecticut. Number 10, Bethel, Connecticut. Bethel is a small town of about 18,000 residents, just southeast of Danbury. Bethel can be pretty dangerous and you can quickly find yourself in the wrong place at the wrong time fairly easy. Just last week, a fatal stabbing made the news, as well as a fight was broken up by officers when 2 residents began fighting each other, one armed with a machete and the other armed with a baseball bat. You know, when you've decided to go full machete on your next door neighbor, it's time to move someplace where you don't have any neighbors because you obviously can't be trusted with them. You know, machete seems seems like an odd thing to arm yourself with. This is Connecticut. I might be able to understand an axe handle or even an axe. Chainsaw maybe. But a machete? It just doesn't make sense. Machete's more of a Florida thing you use. Number 9, Terryville, Connecticut. Terryville is home to 5,000 residents who probably don't be having too much of that education stuff. Education in Terryville doesn't seem to be high on the priority list. It's like right below getting one of those massage chairs for City Hall. All the schools within the town are rated as lower than 50% proficiency despite having a low student population. That's by AreaVibes.com. AreaVibes gives Terryville a D- in schools and a D- in cost of living. Pretty much everything is a D or D- in Terryville except for crime. They have decent crime, but they do have some car issues. This is the type of place you want to skip if you drive or you like your car. In recent months, they have had 3 police chases in and around Terryville, including one where a driver rammed a police car to get away. They also had a head-on collision, which thankfully everyone survived, and a pickup ran into a local American Legion last November. Now, I get it. If you live in a big city, that's like Tuesday. They have less than 6,000 residents. If you move here, make sure you buy a bumper car or something like that. Or have a good lawyer, good accident lawyer, and really good insurance. You're gonna need it. Number 8, Hazardville, Connecticut. Hazardville already sounds like a place you shouldn't live or drive through. About 5,000 people took that leap of faith and are probably realizing about now that it was a bad move and they should have looked at the name as a warning. Hazardville is not a place you want to move in hopes of getting a job or maintaining one. While the income per capita is about $5,000 higher than the average, the unemployment rate is also higher than average, with about 4.4% of the population being unemployed. The future job growth here is also depressing since it's only about 29%, which is lower than the national average. Hazardsville, it's another one that it's got a lot of bad stats except for crime. Crime seems to be okay. It seems to be a theme here in Connecticut. Number 7, Winsted, Connecticut. Winsted is more of a vacation town since the Still River runs straight through town, and just within a few miles are both Crystal and Highland Lake. This means finding a home here will be difficult and pretty expensive if you actually do find one. An updated house near the water will be around $700,000 to $800,000, while a smaller, outdated house further from the water will still set you back about $150,000, which is above the national average. This is another place that sucks in each category but crime. It's not terrible here. Maybe spend a little less on cops and buy at least one computer for the schools. It's like they're trying to save money at the schools by teaching everyone the abacus, telling them it's coming back. We're going to be prepared if it comes back. The unemployment rate in Winsted is 24% higher than the national average, and the poverty level in Winsted is 30% higher than the national average. Number 6, Groton, Connecticut. Groton is located on the Thames River and has about 30,000 residents. When a person lives along a river, near a lake, or any body of water, you always worry about someone drowning in said body of water. Unfortunately, that has happened just within the last month. Not only that, but there was a daytime shooting by some teenagers, which was unrelated to the body in the water, and a resident was charged with arson due to his house catching fire, or someone's house catching fire. They have some stupid things going on here. The town actually has a really low crime rate, so those things were really unusual. Everything else sucks according to AreaVibes.com. Schools blow, weather sucks, housing costs are ridiculous, and the cost of living is offensive, sort of like a Nicolas Cage movie. Man, what happened to that dude? I know I brought that up on other videos, but man, I used to like his videos. Now nothing. If I was him, I would just quit working. Speaking of not working, the unemployment rate in Groton is 17% higher than the national average. Number 5, North Cannon and Cannon, Connecticut. North Cannon may be one of the worst places for drunk driving in Connecticut. Just this week, a middle-aged resident was arrested under drunk driving charges after she was found driving on the wrong side of the road. If you're in the area, ever, be aware and be careful. Have good car insurance, always. Get Geico, whatever you can afford. Not only that, they had a North Cannon resident make some threats at the DMV. Police said a DMV employee reported a customer made comments like, "Today seems like a good day to shoot to kill," and implied he would be back another time. In this day and age, that has got to be one of the stupidest things to do in a government building. To be fair, this is all alleged. He could have just been singing that AC/DC song, Shoot to Thrill, big AC/DC fan. He's leaving the DMV. He's all excited. He gets to get out of that building and sing that song. Maybe he's depressed and said, it's a good day to take a pill. But he was armed when the police picked him up, so who knows? Other than dudes making threats at DMV workers and old ladies not staying on their side of the road, like most of rural Connecticut, they have really low crime. Everything else sucks. Even amenities. Most of the time, amenities just middle of the road. This place doesn't have anything to do here. Except make threats down the DMV, I imagine. The cost of living in this area is 10% higher than the national average. Number 4, Willimantic, Connecticut. Willimantic is home to about 17,000 residents. This is not a place to go to find a job or settle down. The median income within the town is about $33,000 a year, which is pretty low for a town this size. With low income in the town, that means higher poverty rates. Currently, 30% of the population of Willimantic live in poverty, making the poverty level of Willimantic 97% higher than the national average. The unemployment rate is 85% higher than the national average. If you don't have a job or a trust fund, don't move here. Number 3, Sharon, Connecticut. The best part about Sharon is taking a nap, apparently. Really, there's nothing else to do here. Most people seem to move here just because of the close proximity to its neighboring state, New York. But still, being able to claim Connecticut residency? Why someone would prefer to tell people they live in Connecticut over New York is beyond me. Maybe it has something to do with not wanting to be associated with the New York Jets. Who knows? The only thing the town really has going for it is the Housatonic River. It runs right along the eastern border of the town. Maybe the river is why it's so expensive here. The average home will cost about $400,000, which is extremely high for Connecticut's averages. Housing is too expensive, schools aren't great, the weather sucks, and the cost of living is higher than Tommy Chong. They have no crime, no amenities, so they aren't even committing crimes for entertainment here. This place is boring. The cost of living in Sharon is 30% higher than the national average. The cost of housing is 88% higher than the national average. This is in the middle of nowhere, Connecticut. I don't get it. Number 2, Ansonia, Connecticut. Ansonia is located on the Naugatuck River. Like all others on this list, there's no real excitement or crime here. That is until you get these dillweeds behind the wheel of a vehicle. The town has an alarming high rate of incidents with automobiles. Just within the last 2 weeks, 2 residents were struck in a parking lot. 1 lost the leg. An Ansonia woman faces charges, including driving under the influence after her car struck an apartment building on Cherry Street in Milford. In June, a fire hydrant was launched 30 feet from its base after a driver crashed into it. And twin brothers carjacked a delivery driver. Fun times. Stay safe in this town, everyone. Now, there's not a lot going on, besides really, really bad drivers in this town. Everything sucks except for crime, and that's it. That's the only thing they have. Everything else is an F. Housing is too expensive. Schools aren't too great. Weather is horrible. Unemployment isn't great. The only thing they got going for them is little to no crime, again, until these people get behind the wheel of a vehicle. And number 1, Putnam, Connecticut. Putnam has a population of around 7,000 residents and is located in the northeastern area of the state. Being so far away from all the larger cities, employment opportunities aren't the best here. The median home income is slightly lower than the national average, with about 10% of the population living in poverty. The unemployment rate in Putnam is about 60% higher than the national average. And finally, we have a small town in Connecticut that doesn't have an A grade for crime. They have a B. But they also have less than 8,000 people living here, so if you take too many sugar packets from the Starbucks 2 days in a row, you technically have a crime spree going on. The good news is that the home prices are relatively low here, so if you're lucky enough to have a job, which apparently not a lot of people do here, you might be able to score a home loan. And if the stats paint an accurate picture, not a lot of locals went on to college, so your chances of getting a mortgage won't be hampered by some student loan debt. The weird thing about Putnam is the home prices are low, everything else is graded an F. So you have high cost of living, but low home prices. They usually go hand in hand. They're usually the same. But no, they're doing their own thing here. So yeah, if you can get past the boredom and the weather and not having a job, Putnam's not a bad place, but yeah, it's a bad place in reality. All right, heading on out to North Carolina. North Carolina is one of the most popular states to move to over the last 5 or 6 years. It's been popular for quite some time. The last 5 or 6 years, it's really picked up steam, and I don't think that's going to slow down. Let's take a look at their worst rural towns.
Are you thinking about moving to rural North Carolina? Did you watch our best rural towns in the Tar Heel State video? If you did, today we're looking at the other side of that Tar Heel coin. That's right, we're looking at the worst rural towns in North Carolina. Whenever I post a best rural towns video, I get a flood of emails and comments that normally start with, "What about this town?" And then they go on to list some random rural town that in most cases isn't really a great town to live in. Like I said in the last video, I thought I should start listing the rural towns that you should probably avoid. Are these towns the worst place on earth? No, they just have some bad stats, a bad location, things like that. These towns have high crime, high unemployment numbers, and more than enough poverty to go around. One thing I do need to say, when you look at small rural towns anywhere in this country or other countries, 90% of the people are some of the best folks you will ever encounter. Small town people are like that. They're always willing to lend a hand, help you out. They just have that 10% screwing up a really nice place. That's usually the scenario with any rural or small town. Got it? Get it? Good. Let's take a look at North Carolina. Number 6, Ansonville, North Carolina. Ansonville sits about an hour east of Charlotte, North Carolina, just a little west of the PD River, where you could do some fishing and try and figure out why somebody named an island Buzzard Island. This is the type of place you don't want to be stomping around the woods without knowing where you're going. You might run into someone's moonshining operation. Just kidding. That's not as much of a thing as it once was here in the South, but it's not out of the realm of possibility. Keep that in mind. The good news about Ansonville is they got a Dollar General last March. It opened up, which a Dollar General's great. You don't have to get all dressed up like you would if you're going to Walmart. Ansonville has a livability score of 55. Like I said in the last video, if you're above 85 or 90, it's a really nice place to live and it's probably a gated community. When you get around 80 to let's say 75, it's normal middle class blue collar place. When you start getting below, let's say 70 and 65, it starts to suck pretty good. Ansonville is 55. They've got a population of just about 700 residents and they're continually losing some, just a few every couple of years, but they're not growing. They also have a little good news in their stats. Their cost of living is 15% below the national average. Like we've all learned, if nobody wants to live someplace, it's pretty cheap. Housing is 49% below the national average. And here's where it starts getting bad. Their crime rate is 76% higher than the national average, and their violent crime rate 69% higher than the national average. So they're getting after each other there. Their poverty level is almost 20% above the national average, 19.9 to be exact, and their unemployment numbers 72% higher than the national average. If you decide you want to buy a home here, the homes are pretty cheap. I was looking around, they have nothing for sale right now, but in June of this year and May, they sold some homes that are, livable, that normally come on like a half an acre or something like that. You can get them between $150,000 and $200,000. That's not bad. If you need a doctor, they're doing pretty good there too. They got a clinic in town and a family practice, so that's legit. If you need anything more, you can go to Charlotte or Monroe. They have full-blown hospitals. That's like I said, an hour or 45 minutes away to Monroe. And then Wadesboro has some bigger facilities than Ansonville has. Number 5, Garland, North Carolina. Garland is a rural small town far away from everything. The nearest major city is Wilmington, about an hour to the south. Fayetteville is a little bit closer to the north, but I have a policy about Fayetteville. Never suggest going there to anyone unless I don't like them. If you were ever stationed at Fort Bragg, you know exactly what I'm talking about. This is a little out-of-the-way farm place. It's really around nothing, just other little small rural towns. One cool thing I did read about Garland is last month they played Wizard of Oz at the local theater on what would have been Judy Garland's 100th birthday. Garland doesn't have any good fishing or golf. They do, however, have a lot of homes in the area that used their front yard as a salvage operation. This place has a livability score of 50. Remember what I said? Anything below like 65 starts to suck? Yeah, they're at 50. Garland has a population of about 552 residents. Their cost of living, here's another bonus. Again, like we've learned, if you don't want to live there, it's cheap. 17% lower than the national average. Housing is 61% lower than the national average. There's nothing for sale right now except for a few lots, and depending on the acreage, that can be anywhere from 10,000 to 100,000. In the last few months, though, they did sell some homes that needed a little work and they were a little bit older. They were like under $70,000. That ain't bad. Now, here's where it is bad. Their total crime rate is 68% above the national average. Violent crime rate is 61% above the national average. And your stuff is definitely not safe here because the property crime rate is 70% above the national average. They've got a poverty rate that's almost 19%, 18.8%. Their unemployment is 15% lower than the US average. That's weird. They actually have jobs here. They can't be good paying jobs because the median household income here is $30,000. That's 45% lower than the US average. Now, they have a Garland shirt company that pretty much employs most of the town. They did shut down during the pandemic, which sucked, but they have since reopened and hired new employees. This Garland factory has been making shirts since the 1950s. Garland's not doing bad when it comes to healthcare. They've got a medical center in town. It's small, but might suit your needs. But if you need a full-blown hospital, you got about a 20-minute ride to the southwest to Elizabethtown, which is the next on our list. Number 4, Elizabethtown, North Carolina. Like I said, 20 minutes southwest of Garland, you have the town of Elizabethtown. Elizabethtown is a great place if you do like to fish and go to Walmart. They have both. They have the Cape Fear River running right alongside the town, and they got a Walmart about the center of town. This one's a little bigger than most of the towns on this list, but it is definitely a rural small town. There's a couple theories on how this place got its name. One believes that this English nobleman, his wife's name was Elizabeth, and they named this town after her. And then the other one is a local landowner had a mistress, and he named the town after his mistress. Elizabethtown, though, is a good-sized place, has things like Pizza Hut, Domino's, Lion King. It's like a little city, but is definitely rural. There's nothing around this place. I should say nothing outside of town, other than wooded areas, a river, a few lakes, and farmland. Like I said in the last one, Elizabethtown does have a hospital. It's good size, so just about anything you're going to need is going to be done there. If you need anything bigger, you might have to go to Lumberton, which is only about 35 minutes away, but really Wilmington is your best bet for a legit hospital with everything you're looking for. Lumberton's 35 minutes to the west. Elizabethtown has a livability score of 60. And like I said, this is kind of big. They've got about 3,500 residents here, so that's a little big for a rural town, but it's definitely rural. The overall cost of living here is 12% below the national average, and housing's 44% below the national average, so that's solid. What sucks is their crime rate sits about 95% above the national average. Violent crime rate's 146% above the national average. What is going on here? Are they having like surprise fight clubs behind the Walmart or something like that? You go back behind Walmart, maybe you're looking for cardboard, and next thing you know, you're involved in a fight club or something. Your stuff ain't safe either. That's 85% above the national average for property crime. And nobody's got jobs because their unemployment rate's about 25% higher than the national average. The people that do have jobs aren't making much because their household income is $21,000. That's the median. That's 62% lower than the national average. But they got hospitals in town and fishing. Number 3, Rosman, North Carolina. Rosman is a nice little western North Carolina town just south of Asheville, North Carolina. This is a great town if you like to do fly fishing or really any kind of fishing. You like rafting, kayaking, things like that. The town sits right on the French Broad River, about an hour or so north of Greenville, South Carolina. Rosman is actually growing. In the last 3 census, they've gained 120 people. That doesn't sound like a lot, but the town has under 700 residents, so that's a good jump in population. If you're in the French Broad River, watch out for snakes. That's one thing I can tell you. If you don't like snakes, don't go in the French Broad River. This whole area has a whole bunch of creeks in the river there. It's a pretty interesting place. What's really interesting is their livability score. It's 56. That's not good. And like I said, they got a population of under 700. It's actually 673. Their overall cost of living, which we've learned, if a place isn't that great, the cost of living is pretty low. Theirs is 13% below the national average. Housing is 39% below the national average. The total crime rate here is 57% above the national average. Violent crime rate is 50% higher, and property crime's 58% higher than the national average. Those aren't good numbers. Their poverty level is pretty scary. It's 29.4%. So yeah, almost 30% of this town lives below the poverty line. The median household income here is less than $25,000. That's 56% lower than the national average. This place is kind of strange when it comes to real estate. They've got a lot of really rundown places you don't want to buy, and that helps bring down their median home value. But they've got a lot of really nice places in and around the river that are pretty expensive. I'm talking $440,000, $855,000, $420,000. It can get pretty pricey here. It's I wouldn't say it's a resort town. It's kind of an outdoor adventures type of go-to place. Beautiful country around here. They just don't have the best stats at all. As far as healthcare goes, they don't have anything in town. So if you get bit by a snake, you better have someone suck the poison out. The good news is right up the road, you got the Transylvania Regional Hospital. That's like 15 minutes away. Number 2, Sunbury, North Carolina. Sunbury is a census-designated place and an unincorporated community in Gates County. This one's on the eastern side of the state, a little less than an hour from the coast. This is also a great place to move to if you think hanging out at a gas station on a Friday night sounds like a hoot. You should only move here if you're completely out of options. They have a livability score of 47. You have to try to suck to get that bad. They have a population of about 265 residents, and their overall cost of living is even with the national average. The place isn't great, and they're the average. That doesn't make sense at all. You're supposed to get a discount for living in a place like this. Housing is only 14% below the national average. What is high is their crime rate. It's actually 45% higher than the national average, and 12.1% of their population lives below the poverty line. Their unemployment rate averages about 219% above the national average. The people that do work aren't doing terrible. Their median household income is $40,781. That's only 26% lower than the national average, which is still better than a lot of other places, like we just talked about Rosman. That one was $24,000. I was reading they had a special meeting because some of the municipalities, and this one included, has failing water and sewer infrastructure, and they're in desperate need of fixing that. If you want to buy a house here, the only thing they have going right now is, it's okay, but it's $370,000, which for this area, you'd expect it to be a little bit cheaper. In recent months, back in May and April of this year, though, they did have some ones that need a lot of work, and they were going for under $100,000. Kind of looks like anything that's decent is going to be around $250,000, a little less, a little more. As far as healthcare goes, they got nothing in town, but they got a couple places like Gateway Community Health Center in Gatesville, which is about 15 minutes away. That's not terrible, but still, nothing in town. All right, before we get to number 1, don't forget to hit that like button, hit that subscribe button if you already haven't. It doesn't cost you a thing. And go subscribe to On This Day, our other channel. There's a link down below. All right, on to number 1. And number 1, Oxford, North Carolina. Oxford sits about 30 minutes northeast of Durham, North Carolina. It's home to Revlon's largest manufacturing facility. Revlon, the makeup people, it's right here, their largest facility. It's also home to Hannah Cyphers. She is a UFC fighter, actually. She's an ex-UFC fighter. She just got dropped from the promotion recently. You lose 4 fights in a row, that type of thing happens. But I still liked watching her fight. This one almost didn't make the list because it's a little too big, but a lot of the residents live in the rural areas around the town, so we included it. They have a livability score of 50. That's not great. And they have a population of about 8,700 residents. Their overall cost of living is 13% lower than the national average, so that's not bad. It's a good-sized rural town or small town, whatever you want to call it, and they've got a pretty low cost of living. Their housing is also pretty low, 27% below the national average. The downside is their crime is 46% above the national average, and their violent crime rate is 163% above the national average. That ain't good. 25.8% of their residents live below the poverty line. That sucks. If you got some health problems, this is probably a really good place to live because down in Raleigh, Durham, you have some of the best healthcare we have in the country. Now, they don't have much in and around town. They got a couple clinics and things like that and a couple doctor's offices. But if you need anything big, you're going to head down there. Now, like I said, their homes are a little bit below the national average, but really they're not. They just have a lot of really run down cheap places that brings down their average. Realistically, if you want to buy a home here, you're looking at a minimum $250,000. Anything below $200,000 probably isn't going to be worth your time. But it goes all the way up. They have a lot of new construction for close to $400,000, $500,000. They even have some with a lot of acreage that are going for over $1 million. But you better bring some horses because those are usually horse farms or ranches, whatever you want to call them.
All right, this is going way back. I think this one was done in mid-2018, early 2018. I got a lot of grief over this one over the years. Here we go. The worst small towns in Idaho. What is going on, everyone? Hey, have you ever thought about moving to small-town Idaho? A lot of people in recent years have. Small-town life is spreading across the country at a pretty good pace. People have gotten so burnt out on cities and suburbs, they're just trying to escape, basically. Like I said in my last small-town video, because of the internet and jobs that you can do from home, small-town life has become an option for more and more people every single year. One of the most popular states to find that little piece of small-town heaven is Idaho. You can find some of the best small towns in the country in the Gem State. Yeah, that's their nickname, the Gem State. You can also find some not-so-great small towns in that state. Today's video is about the not-so-great small towns and why they may or may not be for you. So if you're thinking about making that move to the small towns and the potato state, you should watch my top 10 worst small towns in Idaho. Number 10, Hidden Springs. Hidden Springs is a planned community 20 minutes north of Boise with about 2,000 residents. The city was carefully designed in 1999. Since so much planning went into the town, it's no surprise that homes can get way out of budget fast. The average home sells for about $400,000, which is about 111% higher than the national average. The reason this place is on the list is not because of the normal things like violent crime or it's run down. It's actually a really nice, aesthetically pleasing place to look at. It's nice. It has other problems, like cost of living is crazy. It's about 40% higher than the state average. And I find that one strange because there's nothing to spend your money on out there. As far as amenities go, it has nothing. It has a little mall, but it looks like most of the shops are vacant. I don't know. It's kind of strange. And before you say anything, stop typing. We know that's just the way you like it there in Hidden Springs. Number 9, Pierce, Idaho. This place is truly out in the sticks. Less than 2% of the homes in Pierce have internet, and I don't think that's by choice. That right there should be the first indicator that this tiny town in the Idaho outback isn't for you. Pierce only has about 508 residents, and that was as of the 2010 residents, and that's down about 125 from the 2000 census. They're losing people in Pierce. Can't imagine why. Pierce actually has or had a motel at one point. I called the number listed to see if they were still in business. All I got was a sobbing woman that asked me if it was true that they canceled Seinfeld. Number 8, Middleton, Idaho. Middleton is right outside of Caldwell, Idaho, and houses about 6,500 residents. Middleton has no private schools and only has 5 public schools, all of which I don't recommend sending your kids to. The average student test score is about 38% of what it should be, while the national average is at least 53. Only about 78% of the residents have graduated high school, and that's according to AreaVibes.com. Now, I've been to Middleton, and it's not a bad-looking little town. They have a nice burger place called the Burger Den. What they also have is a bunch of teachers that aren't good decision makers. A group of teachers at a middle school decided to dress up in stereotypical Mexican costumes and stand behind a cardboard border wall. The photos were made public when someone secretly snapped them and posted them to social media. Before you say it, I'm not making a political point here. It is a joke that wasn't well thought out and was offensive. At least that's what you say when a group of 8th grade boys do this. These were their teachers. Number 7, Star, Idaho. Star is right next to Middleton, Idaho, and it's just as bad. I mean, they don't have a bunch of teachers dressed up in racist costumes, but it's still bad about everything else. The income per capita is about $26,000. That's 12% lower than the national average. The only thing that isn't subpar in this town is crime. They have a very low crime rate. They're doing solid there. Everything else, I mean, all the stats, they're not terrible. They're graded C or D, C minus really. The only thing I did notice is about the jobs is they don't have many well-paying jobs. They have jobs for the most part, just not ones that pay. They also tried and failed to recall their mayor last year. Number 6, Greenleaf, Idaho. Greenleaf is a small town of only about 1,500 residents, just west of Caldwell. The town doesn't offer very much, just about enough to be considered an actual town. The town offers the Greenleaf store, which is a 4-pump gas station and a mini-mart, a coffee shop, and 1 private school, which teaches preschool to 12th grade. It also is one of those towns that probably has more broken down cars than actual residents. The cost of living and housing in Greenleaf are really low. And this is really good news because they don't have any jobs to speak of. Number 5, Bonners Ferry, Idaho. Bonners Ferry is a very small town of about 2,500 residents. If you're not comfortable in the snow, this may not be the place for you. The town experiences on average 62 inches of snow a year. On top of the likelihood of getting snowed in every year, you may get snowed in with someone who can't read. The schools in Bonner Ferry get a big fat F from AreaVibes.com. Now, I know statistics don't tell the whole education story of Bonners Ferry. Oh, I'm sorry. How insensitive of me. I used the word story. Number 4, Homedale, Idaho. Homedale is about 5 miles east of the Oregon border and has about 2,600 residents. While the town does offer basic amenities to its residents, like schools, grocery stores, they got an Ace Hardware, it doesn't offer much else. Most residents commute if they have a job that pays more than minimum wage. Pretty much all you're going to get in Homedale is minimum wage jobs. This is another one that really doesn't seem to be promoting the whole learning thing. School test scores in Homedale are 25% lower than the national average. Number 3, Mallet City, Idaho. Mallet City is in southern Idaho with about 200 residents, and it's not a city, it's a town. It's really small. Moving to Mallet won't be easy or spontaneous. You won't be able to pack up and just go there and find some place to stay. You'll be homeless for a while, living in your car. Homes aren't readily available here, like they are in a lot of other places in Idaho. They mainly offer plots of land and really worn down homes that aren't so cheap. I mean, it's like they have some cheap homes, but they're so run down, they should be cheaper. I don't know if this is some kind of strange sales tactic by real estate agents there, but it's almost like they're thinking, if we charge a bunch, maybe they won't notice they just bought a meth trailer. You know, it's weird. On top of that, like a lot of places in rural Idaho, their education just gets a big fat F from Area Vibes. Number 2, Marzine, Idaho. Marzine, at least I think that's how you pronounce it. I had a really hard time finding anyone that pronounced it clearly. Marzine is home to about 1,500 residents who really don't care too much about the town, and it shows. They have a lot of vacant buildings and warehouses right on the main strip, if you want to call it a strip, that is. Marzine really isn't that big and doesn't have many residents, which is why it's so shocking that its pollution index is 85% worse than the national average. It's doing all the polluting. Education, employment, and housing all get Fs. Don't move here. And number 1, Old Town, Idaho. Old Town, Idaho is on the border of Washington. There's a street called State Street on the west side of town that separates Newport, Washington with Old Town, Idaho. Not many signs indicate when you've entered or when you leave each state, but if you look at the buildings, you can tell. At the intersection of Walnut and State Street, you can see a serious difference. On one side, you have a nice Safeway and a newer McDonald's, and on the Old Town side, you have some buildings that are in a serious need of a paint job and a parking lot sweeper. Now here's some scary stats. Only 64% of the residents have completed 8th grade in Old Town. The unemployment rate in Old Town is 68% higher than the national average. The poverty level in Old Town is 138% higher than the national average. There's less than 300 people in this town. You would think they could pull it together with a little bit of effort. But no, they've got their own agenda. Alright, so that's my top 10 worst small towns in Idaho. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Hope you know where not to live in Idaho now. Idaho is actually a really nice state, but like every place, it's got some not so good places, and these are 10 of them. Everybody have a great day. Don't forget all the links below. Don't forget to subscribe. Leave me a comment. Tell me what you thought. Everybody have a great day. Be nice to each other. All right, heading back down south again to a state I lived in for like 2 years one time, then 6 months another time. Lived here a couple times. The great state of Georgia. Now, it is a great state, and it's got a lot going for it. It's just got some really, really backwater towns. Let's take a look. Hey, welcome back to the channel, everyone. It's time for a new list. When I first started doing my videos about Atlanta, people kept asking me about the rest of Georgia. They wanted to know the best places and the worst places to live, and asked me to do some videos about small town Georgia. So I will. Let me start off by saying I love Georgia, and I love the people of this great state. It has some of the best small towns in the country. They also have some really bad small towns. For reference, and to help out the people that want to say things like I miss Savannah or Macon or some other major city in Georgia, a town with a population of under 10,000 is considered a small town. And that's the focus of today's list. So here's my top 10 worst small towns in Georgia. Number 10, Fort Valley. Fort Valley is a city in Peach County, Georgia. Imagine that. Something named Peach in Georgia. How unusual. This place is not a great place. The unemployment rate in Fort Valley is 119% higher than the national average, and over 10% of the residents are without jobs. This place is in such bad shape that they have 4 payday loan locations and a pawn shop in a town of under 9,000. Number 9, Montezuma. Montezuma was named after the famous Aztec leader by soldiers returning from the Mexican War that lasted from 1846 to 1848. Is it me, or does it sound like a bad idea to name your town after a defeated king and something that happens to you when you drink water from Mexico that gives you an intestinal infection? I think you're just asking for bad luck. And they've had plenty of it. This town is rated F in every category but cost of living. The unemployment rate in Montezuma is 120% higher than the national average. They've got no jobs. Number 8, Hilltop. The TV show The Walking Dead is filmed all over Georgia and has a settlement in it called Hilltop. Not sure if this town was the inspiration for it, but the hilltop on the TV show is often attacked by zombies and assaulted by evil men. The real-life hilltop has had no reports of zombies, but plenty of assaults. Its 400 residents reported almost 100 assaults a couple years back, and it hasn't got much better. You know your town is bad when it has a listing in the Urban Dictionary. Look it up, I'm not kidding. Number 7, Woodbury. Woodbury is one of the oldest towns in Meriwether County. It is also another location for The Walking Dead. The actual scenes of Woodbury were filmed up north in Sonoy, but they used the name Woodbury for some reason. I guess because in the comic books it was Woodbury, but they decided to film up in Sonoy. If you look at both the towns, I think they would have been better off if they would have filmed in Woodbury for the simple fact that it already looks like a zombie apocalypse went down here. The median home price in Woodbury is 76% lower than the national average. Number 6. Quitman. Quitman is in Brooks County, Georgia. The community was named after John A. Quitman, a hero in the Mexican-American War. I guess Georgia was running a deal on land after that war. Georgia has a bunch of towns that sprung up in the immediate years after that war. In the last couple years of doing these lists, I've learned a few things. One of them is when a town has bad grades on almost every category, one category does great, and that's cost of living. It's obviously because if everything sucks in schools, jobs, crime, nobody wants to live there, so it's cheaper to live there. Congratulations, Quitman, you have an A+ in the cost of living category. And you also have this really cool courthouse, so that's kind of cool. Number 5. Collins. Good news. Collins, Georgia has an A+ grade for cost of living. And if you've been watching this list from the very beginning, you know that's not good. Collins has all the things you need to be a crappy small town. It's out in the sticks, has a bunch of shuttered businesses, and a Dollar General. It also has another store that gets a great rating. Janet's Grocery gets 5 stars from a man named Harry Ween. That's his name. Harry Ween, W-E-E-N, last name U-R, apparently. I think it's a fake name. I could be wrong. He wanted us to know that they have the technology to keep beer cold, and that women will kick you in the sack if you make nipple comments in the store's parking lot. I can hardly wait to move to Collins. Number 4. Hiltonia. Hiltonia, Georgia took its names in hopes of landing the Hilton Corporation headquarters some time ago. I'm totally kidding. I don't know why they named the town this. I did find some videos online of Hiltonia's only rapper. I guess he's on a really low budget. All his videos had the software logo across the middle of the screen, like he couldn't afford to buy it, so they splashed their watermark across the screen. Yeah, that kind of sucked, but oh well. And I know he's on a real low budget because the backdrop of all his music videos was either his home or the local coin-operated car wash. Him and all his homies hang out there. I looked at a map of the place and looked at some of the pictures. Apparently, that's the only place to hang out there. Either that or the woods. The unemployment rate in Hiltonia is 81% higher than the national average, and the poverty level is 140% higher than the national average. And it's out in the sticks. Not a good place to live. Number 3. Swainsboro. Swainsboro, Georgia was named in recognition of Stephen Swain, the state senator who introduced the bill for the county's creation in 1812. In other words, they were hurried to come up with a name, or they lacked any creativity. He introduced the bill, nothing more. State senators don't get whole towns named after him. Maybe a small park, not a whole town. Then I saw what this town looks like and how small it is, and it's fitting. It's out in the woods and really not a lot going on there. I get the feeling they have more empty stores than occupied stores in this place. The poverty level in Swainsboro is 181% higher than the national average. Go Swainsboro. Number 2. Girard. Girard, Georgia is a very small town not too far from the South Carolina border. The place is so small, it only has like 30 buildings, and 20 of those are like sheds and garages. I get the feeling if you pulled over the side of the road here in a motorhome and parked, nobody would complain if you stayed for 3 years. You might start getting your mail there eventually, and it actually might just be someone's property. It's a lot of open space here and a lot of rundown buildings. On a serious note about Girard, they have an organization that rescues animals. The county is almost the size of Rhode Island, and it has no animal control service, so it kind of falls on them. They're called Girard Lifesavers, and I'll leave a link below. If you want to donate, go ahead. I did. They're doing good work. And number 1, Sardis. Sardis, Georgia is one of the worst graded small towns in Georgia. Area Vibe rated at 44. Considering I've been looking at AreaVibe.com stats on a daily basis for over a year, Sardis is the second lowest I've found. The other was 39, and it was in New Jersey. To give you perspective on that, most people consider Detroit one of the worst cities in the country. It got a 50. Sardis got a 44. The poverty level in Sardis is 194% higher than the national average, and only 67% of the residents have completed the 8th grade. On a positive side of Sardis, while researching this video, I came across tons of videos of very talented local gospel singers. They got a nice church scene there with great singers. That's not my type of music, but even I was impressed. They should be proud of that. Sardis is probably one of the worst places in Georgia you could live as far as small towns go. All right, we get to our final video. Another town. All right, we get to our final video in this compilation, which is Tennessee, the volunteer state. It's a strange state because it's always been popular. People have always been moving there. I'd say since about the mid-90s. For some reason, younger people just started heading out there. It's really strange. A lot of people from California, I know, headed out to Tennessee. I still don't get it. It's a great state. It's got some backwater towns, too, just like Georgia. But I don't know. There's just fascination. A lot of people love this state. They do have the backwater towns, like I said. Let's take a look.
Today we're looking at the other side of the Tennessee coin, the worst rural towns. Like I said in previous videos, whenever I post a best rural towns video, I get a flood of emails that all start with, what about this town? And then the person goes on to list some other random rural town that in most cases looks like a miserable place to live. I thought I should start listing rural towns that you should probably avoid. Are these towns the absolute worst places to live on the earth? No. They just have some bad stats, a bad location, things like that. Okay, before we get started, one thing I have to say. When you go to any small town in the United States, 90% of the people in that town are going to be some of the greatest people you ever meet. The really nice, friendly folks. They just always have that 10% that are really screwing up the stats and making a nice place to live a bad place to live. Get it? Got it? Good. Let's take a look. Number 10, Ridgely, Tennessee. Ridgely, Tennessee sits almost 2 hours north of Memphis and about a mile and a half east of the shores of the Mississippi River. That's from downtown Ridgely, like their main street. Which this also means it's not too far from Missouri, or Missouri, depending on what part of Missouri you come from. Ridgely doesn't look like a terrible place. It does look like it's seen better days. Their downtown, which is Main Street, looks like it could use some serious renovations. And judging from this street view picture from 2019, they might be doing some. Probably not enough. Ridgely has a population of 1,980 people. That was in 2020. I think they've lost a couple since then, but they got a crime rate that's 59% above the national average. Now, this is strange. Their crime rate isn't astronomical like other cities we've seen. This is a small rural town, so 59% is kind of high, especially they got almost 2,000 people, so that's legit. But normally when you see a violent crime rate that is as high as theirs, 221% above the national average, it normally stems from domestic violence issues. This is a southern state, and the southern states kind of have a problem with it. 9 of the 15 with the highest domestic violence rate are southern states, with Tennessee being number 14. Now, I'm not sure if that's Ridgely's problem. I tried to look it up. I couldn't find anything on it. That's usually an indicator. I don't know. The poverty level in Ridgely is 109% above the national average. Number 9, Bethel Springs, Tennessee. Bethel Springs sits about 35 minutes south of Jackson, Tennessee, which there's a great Kroger fight on there. Some women got in a fight in a Kroger in Jackson, Tennessee, and it is hysterical. And one of the ladies was doing my favorite thing that kind of indicates that they don't know how to fight. They put their hand across their chest like, I don't know, a butler does when he has a white hand towel across his arm, and then they hold their other hand down around their hip, and they act like that is leaving your face exposed. I've boxed in the Army and in college. I've been in a few fisticuffs in my life. When I see someone do that, I know they're getting ready to get their front teeth loosened up. But if you want to see a good fight in a grocery store, watch that one. Anyway, Bethel Springs is far enough away from Jackson where they don't have a Kroger they have to worry about fighting in. Bethel Springs is a farming town of about 950 people, and they got a crime rate that's 104% above the national average. Bethel Springs has a poverty rate that sits about 109% above the national average. The good news is if you want to buy a house here, they've got something for every budget. They have lots for as low as $12,000. They have homes you probably don't want for about $60,000. Ones that look like they're decent for about $150,000. And they go all the way up into the $400,000 and $500,000 for really nice homes that probably come with like 2 acres. Just stay out of the Kroger in Jackson. Number 8, Sandburg, Tennessee. Sandburg, Tennessee is located on the eastern shore of Reelfoot Lake. So prior to December 10th, 2021, they didn't have the best stat. And I kind of feel bad about putting them on the list because this town was destroyed by a tornado. They are rebuilding. But the reason I'm going to leave them on the list is because I want to put some links for their GoFundMe on this video, so they'll be down below. There's a few. You could just type in Sandburg, Tennessee, GoFundMe. A lot of the families there have GoFundMes up and they could use some help. But Sandburg did have a population of 200, and their crime rate was 43% higher than the national average. The poverty level in Sandburg is about 52% above the national average, which isn't good. I'm just guessing that means some of these people may not have homeowners insurance or whatever. Or if they do, it's probably not the best. But if you do want to buy a home here, they do have some pretty cheap lots going. They used to have homes on them, sadly, and now they don't. But there's one lot currently going for $19,000. It's good size. Then they have a home that was untouched. It's going for $65,000. And then they have 65 acres near town that is going for about $240,000. So if you want to get in on a rebuilding of a small lake town, Sandburg may be it for you. It just didn't have the best stats before the tornado. Number 7, Atwood, Tennessee. While I was trying to record this, I almost said Roman Atwood like 6 different times. He's an old school YouTuber that's huge. He's not into it as much as he used to be, but I used to watch him all the time. But Atwood, Tennessee has a population of 921 residents. Roman Atwood is not one of them. Atwood sits about 2 hours west of Nashville, Tennessee. And they got a crime rate that sits about 90% above the national average. That's not good, especially for such a small town. This is a cute little rural farming town that doesn't look bad. They just don't have the greatest stats. Like their poverty rate. Their poverty rate's 60% higher than the national average. If you want to buy a home in Atwood, you're probably looking around $200,000 as your starting money. That'll get you something decent, and they have a lot of newer construction that start off around $300,000. If you want a lot and build something on it, they've got quite a few of them, starting at around an acre, going up to about 3 acres for $30,000, just depending on which one you choose, I guess. Number 6, Trenton, Tennessee. Trenton, Tennessee probably shouldn't be on this list because it's a little big, but it's definitely a rural town. Trenton has a population of just about 4,000 residents. They've got a McDonald's, a Subway, a Dollar General, and a Family Dollar. Nothing says southern town like two sworn enemies battling it out across Main Street for the American dollar. Family Dollar is in the Davy Crockett Mall, which is a little roadside mall. The significance here is Davy Crockett. He is a big hero in Tennessee. He was born in Tennessee and died at the Alamo, and everyone knows that story. A lot of people confuse him with Daniel Boone that aren't from the South or Tennessee especially. That's Davy Crockett, not to be confused with Daniel Boone. A lot of people do that. If you're not from Tennessee or that part of the country, you think Daniel Boone is Davy Crockett or vice versa. Daniel Boone started in Pennsylvania and was about 50 years before Davy Crockett. They kind of did the same thing. They were frontiersmen, explorers. Davy Crockett went on to be like a congressman and stuff like that and went down to the Alamo and got killed there. But so you'll run into a lot of things in Tennessee that are named Davy Crockett. Trenton has a crime rate that's 93% above the national average, and their poverty level is 143% higher than the national average. If you want to buy a home here, they got something for every budget. They have small homes that, they look livable. You might need to do a little bit of work, but they start off around $30,000. If you want something decent, you're probably going to be spending around $175,000 all the way up to $400,000. And for $400,000, you get something that's like really nice. Number 5, Baileyton, Tennessee. Baileyton sits about an hour northeast of Knoxville. It was originally called Laurel Gap. This area was first settled in 1776 and named after two brothers who lived in the area, Claudius and Thomas P. Baileyton. The town was incorporated in 1915, so it's been around a while and it's really not gaining population. They only have 427 residents. And they do have a Baileyton celebration every year. They got it coming up this September, I believe. Now, when it comes to the crime rate, this one isn't terrible. Their crime rate is actually 6% above the national average, but their violent crime rate is 127% above the national average. The poverty level in Baileyton is 43% higher than the national average. If you want to buy a house here, it's kind of weird. There's nothing in town, but in the surrounding area, nice homes that are rural with a couple acres start off around $130,000. But they can get all the way up to like $1 million for like 300 acres. If you like to fish and let's say hike in the woods, this is a great place for it. You can't go what seems like a mile without running into a creek in any direction, or several. Number 4, Pleasant Hill, Tennessee. Pleasant Hill is about an hour west of Knoxville with a little over 500 residents that are only one generation or so past moonshining being a legitimate profession. Don't confuse this one with Pleasant Hill, California. Just kidding. It's impossible to confuse these two. In Pleasant Hill, Tennessee, most homes go for under $200,000. In Pleasant Hills, California, a one-bedroom condo will run you $750,000. It's up there in the Bay Area. It's incredibly expensive. While I was researching this, almost every state has a Pleasant Hills. Pleasant Hill has a crime rate that's 69% above the national average, and their poverty level sits about 98% above. This town was first settled in 1819, then in 1894, a teacher from the American Missionary Association established the Pleasant Hills Academy. Today, the main building of that academy is known as Pioneer Hall, and it's still standing. And stay to the end, and you'll get to hear about a town that was named after a fake Indian chief. He wasn't fake, he was from a novel. Number 3, Toontown, Tennessee. Actually, it's just Toon, Tennessee, but it is a town. Toon sits a little over an hour east of Memphis, Tennessee. That hour marks just far enough away not to get any of that Memphis stink on you. And they have a population of about 366 residents. Now, here's something nice about the place. Their total crime rate is 10% lower than the national average. Bravo! But like all toons, they're violent. You ever seen a Bugs Bunny cartoon? How about Tom and Jerry? They are very violent toons. This town's violent crime rate is 369% above the national average. Outstanding, Toontown. Now, the cool thing is their property crime is actually 85% lower than the national average, and that helps them with their crime rate. Their poverty rate is 86% higher than the national average. When it comes to real estate, a decent place is going to start off around $160,000, $175,000 and work their way up to about $300,000. And those lots usually come with an acre or two at least. Now, they don't have a lot for sale right now, but in recent months they've sold some, and that's about what it sits at. They did sell a bunch of lots, though, in recent months, so I get the feeling someone's getting ready to build something there. This, again, is another great place if you like the outdoors and you like to fish. Tons of creeks around here, and the Hatchie River isn't too far away either. That's great for fishing, catfish and gar normally, and a lot of people like to canoe this river. This town started off in 1856. Now, people lived in the area before that, but the town kind of took off in 1856, and it was developed around a railroad stop. This is kind of interesting. Toon is home to the Kilgore Flare Company. The company has operated near Toon since the early 1920s. They manufacture like those air-deployed decoy flares that are used by the U.S. military aircraft. They have a really big complex for such a small little town out in the middle of nowhere. Number 2, Linden, Tennessee. Linden is about an hour and a half southwest of Nashville. This is the type of place your wife makes you move to when she finds out you're a regular at Hooters. You obviously can't be trusted, and you gotta move someplace where she can keep her eye on you. Linden is a small town of 881 residents. Not a Hooters anywhere. But they do have plenty of crime. Their crime rate is 114% above the national average. Now, Linden covers a big area, big rural area, but the town itself sits on the Buffalo River, which is a pretty good river for fishing and kayaking, whatever you want to do. And then you want to go a little bigger, on the outskirts of town, you have the Tennessee River, about 15 minutes away from downtown. Linden has more than its fair share of poverty. The poverty level in Linden, 169% above the national average. That's not great. What really sucks about this place, you don't even get a break on the real estate. It's kind of expensive. A shack here will cost at least $150,000. But a majority of the homes that are worth living in and you could move right in and not have to worry about much, start off around $250,000 and work their way up. All right, before we get to number 1, don't forget we have another channel called On This Day. There's a link down below. All right, on to number 1. And number 1, Nyota, Tennessee. Nyota sits about the midway point between Knoxville and Chattanooga, right near Athens. This town was originally called Mouse Creek, but it was renamed in 1897 to avoid confusion with a railroad stop in Jefferson County that was called Mossy Creek. And they got the name Nyota from some dime novel that had an American Indian chief named Nyota. That's a little interesting. After that, there's not much to this place. Nyota has a population of about 1,000, and their crime rate is 33% above the national average. Their violent crime rate is 111% above. This one has one of the lowest poverty levels I've seen on this list, or actually in most of Tennessee, in the areas that would be considered bad rural towns. It's only 26% higher than the national average. Not bad. If you want to buy a home here, buckle up. It gets expensive. They have some really nice homes here that go for over $600,000 and $700,000. If you want anything livable that's ready to go and nice, it's going to be at least $200,000 on up. Anything below that, you run the risk of getting a visit from that couple that's on the DIY show Fixer Upper.
All right, that's the video. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Don't forget to give it a big thumbs up. Leave me a comment. Everybody have a great day. Be nice to each other.